Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the MHA What If with another fanfiction. This is the first part of What If Deku was sent to a mental institution? All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. It was about lunchtime. Making sure his sister was safe in his room, door securely locked, Izuku quietly made his way to the kitchen. No noise was the key. The house was dead silent, and Izuku didn't have a clue to his dad's whereabouts, or whether or not his mom had a client home with her. Some of the other members could have been there too. Izuku grabbed some sandwich supplies and headed back for his room, bumping hard into the dining room table right before the stairs. Izuku froze, but the damage had been done. "Why the hell are you making so much ruckus?" Izuku's father, Hisashi, calmly asked, sitting up from the couch. Izuku could tell he had just woken him from how his hair was messed up, and probably had a bad hangover from the previous night. Izuku still had blood on him from that, and shivered at the thought. I'm sorry," he instantly quivered, hoping to get to his room quickly. "Sorry isn't going to fucking cut it," Hisashi yells out, making Izuku jump and fall backwards, shaking. Hisashi grabbed one of the bottles still laying in front of him and smashed it onto Izuku's head. Izuku gave out a helpless cry from the pain and grabbed his head, trying to brush off some of the glass. "You sound just like that fucking whore," Hisashi spat, grabbing Izuku's shirt collar and yanking him upwards so he couldn't breathe. Izuku grabbed Hisashi's arms, trying to get him to let go, kicking out his legs in a panic. Izuku's legs made contact with something, and with a screech, Izuku was violently thrown across the room, where he landed against the wall and groaned in pain, gasping for breath. Jumping up, Izuku grabbed the food supplies that were scattered across the room and ran upstairs while his father shouted curses. Izuku quickly knocked on the door 2 times to let Arie know to open it. When Izuku saw her face, tears dripping down it in fear, he shoved the food into the room. "Lock the door," Izuku demanded, now. Izuku stayed at the door protectively while his father clambered up the steps, until he heard the click from his lock. Taking in a relived breath that his sister was safe and fed, Izuku braced himself for the oncoming beating and yelling. He knew it wouldn't be pretty. Izuku woke up in the bathroom, in dirty, muddy red bath water. With a sigh, he re-rinsed himself and checked the mirror. Izuku wasn't looking good, covered in scars, and littered with bruises and burns. His left eye was swollen, and he had a busted lip. Izuku's hair was sticky with the blood he couldn't get out, and he had visible choke marks all along his neck. Glass shards were still visible too, and his nose was covered in dry blood, leaking down to his chin. Izuku's back was black, blue, and red, and he had multiple stab wounds on his feet. Izuku's whole body burned. When he went to move to the door, his feet gave out, and with a cry, Izuku crumpled to the floor. Pushing himself back up, while tears pooled at his eyes, Izuku made his way back upstairs, slowly but surely. When Izuku made it to his door, he nearly cried in relief. "Open the door," his raspy voice came out as he knocked twice. A second later, a small head peeked out, and Arie grabbed his arm, gently helping Izuku into his room. While Izuku collapsed onto the bed, Arie locked the door, then ran over and hugged him tightly, releasing him instantly when he started to cough in pain. "Aizu," she whispered, tears forming at her own eyes. "Let me wrap you up." Izuku was going to decline, but changed his mind at another coughing fit, and nodded. "All right, sweetie. Make it fast though, okay? The gang's coming over tonight, so you'll have to stay in the closet again." Arie gave a tight-lipped nod. She hated when their parents' gang came over. They scared Arie, and Aizu was always really sick after they left. Sometimes they'd cause Aizu to leave for a while, and she wouldn't get to eat until they came back again. Arie was terrified. As if Izuku read her mind, he gave her a reassuring hug. "It's okay, that's why I brought up a bunch of supplies. You'll have enough food, even if I disappear for a while." That made Arie start to full-on cry. As she carefully peeled off Izuku's shirt, she tried to explain herself. "Aizu, I want them to leave and not come." I don't like them and… Izuku hugged her again. You don't want me to leave? Arie gave a sniffle and a nod as she started bandaging Izuku up. They went into a silence while Arie kept working. Eventually, she made him lean down while she carefully removed the bigger glass shards she could see and eventually just wrapped up his head. You always get hurt, Arie finally said, confirming she was done. Arie stood up and helped Izuku to a mirror where he could survey the first aid he'd gotten. Nice. He praised and felt better when Arie looked happier. Izuku wished he could smile for Arie. Or at least teach her too. But neither of them had seen one in years, so they didn't even know where to start. Izuku had tried in his free time, but he just didn't know which muscles to pull or mess with. It's always ended up just being a sneer, so he'd stopped trying. Arie was similar, but she kept trying for Aizu. Arie has promised to not give up. Izuku looked down at Arie as she had clambered into his lap. He stroked her curly white hair and sighed. Sorry. I really have to go before they arrive, Izuku whispered to her. Arie whimpered, but rolled over, so he could leave easier. Izuku watched her sleeping form for a while, before standing up to go. He had to take a minute to breathe through the pain, but once he got moving, it was almost automatic. Locking the door behind him, Izuku cleaned up the glass and any empty bottles he had missed earlier. Izuku then got to work with the food, pulling out chips and chicken to thaw. Izuku checked the time, confirming he had about 10 minutes to finish setting everything up. Then it would be 6. And fighting time. Izuku tried not to jump as the door was thrown open by his dad, who was laughing and messing around with some other men. Izuku recognized them as Twice, Kenji, Jiren, and a newcomer he wasn't familiar with. When Izuku was spotted, Hisashi rolled his eyes and barely motioned to him. This is Izuku. He's the one boss thought you would like. Izuku shivered. His father was third in command to the boss, second to only Tamura Shigaraki. Their gang was called the League, and unfortunately for him, their house was one of the main hideouts. Actually, his mom and dad weren't even married. They had just been assigned to this house together, and things happened. Originally, Hisashi and Inko had wanted to get rid of Izuku. They didn't want a child. It was boss who had decided that another kid could be useful, and demanded Inko to have the baby and keep him alive. And his parents made sure he knew that. Single. When Arie came as well, it was as an alliance with another gang. Izuku didn't know their name, nor care. All Izuku cared about was Arie, who was that sealed to the deal. No one dared touch her, and instead gave her to Izuku to take care of. What did it matter they were only half-siblings? Izuku loved her with everything. Without her, Izuku would have killed himself a long time ago. Hey, kid, ready to go? Twice asked, snapping Izuku out of his trace. Izuku saw they were all waiting for him, and slightly shrunk under his dad's death glare as he quickly hurried after them out the door. Izuku wondered briefly whether or not he should let Arie know he was leaving, but decided against it last second. No need to remind everyone she was there. Arie would know when there was no 2 times only knock. Izuku got into the van, and sat in silence while the others discussed their bets for the upcoming fight. As they pulled up, Twice introduced Izuku to the unknown member, Stain. Of course, Izuku didn't say anything, but nodded in acknowledgement. Stain, on the other hand, ignored Izuku. Not that he cared. Izuku was all too used to it. As they got out, Izuku noticed another boy, with mismatched red and white hair, and a bright scar, watching them. Izuku didn't try to wave, as that would have resulted in a punishment, and he doubted he would get a response. For some reason, the boy intrigued Izuku. Hadn't he seen him before? Izuku ended up getting smacked on the cheek, and fell to the ground, silently cursing himself for not paying enough attention. Quickly fixing himself, Izuku stood, and followed after his father, keeping his gaze on the ground. He could feel Hisashi's glare on him. That was never good. But along with his glare, Izuku was strongly aware the scarred boy was also watching him. Izuku really hoped this wouldn't be a problem. While Izuku was roughly pulled inside the building, he could have sworn he saw a camera snap, which was strictly forbidden. Izuku knew the rules inside out. Hell, Izuku had them beat into him. If you were caught with any phones or cameras, you would be kicked out of them, and probably killed by whoever you took a picture of. It was a pretty big deal. Izuku shook his head and kept following Hisashi to the sign-up table. It had to have been his imagination. No way someone would be that stupid. Izuku stood still while he was evaluated by some judges. "You're good to go. You're match 15, one of the judges said, passing us through. Hisashi nodded and took Izuku to the waiting area, followed by Stain, while the others went to make their bets. Izuku's only lost outside of the ring. Never inside. He wasn't allowed. All it would take is one time, one loss, and Hisashi would kill Arie. So Izuku has trained and trained, until he was completely unbeatable by his fighting group. Hell, Izuku could even beat some of the league members if he tried. Not that he was allowed to, of course. A while passed, and Izuku saw the scarred boy pass by them again. He wanted to say something, and could tell the red and white-haired boy wanted to as well, but neither did. Not with their parents right there at least. Izuku checked the boards. 3 matches to go. Izuku decided it would be about 20 minutes depending on how well or bad the matches would go, as he watched the current fighters get flung backwards by a third person. A couple more minutes passed, when a scrawny kid with purple hair was also dragged through the room. Literally dragged. On a collar. Izuku winced in sympathy, and instantly felt at his own neck. He knew the feeling. Izuku has worn collars before, they were not fun. Finally, match 15 was called, and Izuku followed the guards to the ring. He watched as Stain and Hisashi got front row seats, before fully turning his attention to the match. Izuku couldn't see his opponents yet, but he had the feeling it would be 3 or 4 people he was fighting based on how many people were here tonight. That was okay. He's fought worse odds. As the match bell rang, signaling the fight was beginning, and Izuku was pushed into the ring, he finally got a good look at the other 3 fighters. His prediction was spot on. On the right side of Izuku was the scarred boy from earlier. On the left side was the purple-haired boy, whose collar had been removed, but he now had duct tape wrapped tightly around his mouth. Across from them was just a guard, probably put there to try and make things more interesting. Izuku went for the guard first, not wanting to fight the other boys quite yet. Unfortunately, it's also what the scarred boy was thinking, so the two both slammed into the guard at the same time, allowing the guard to safely jump back and the two to be facing each other head-on. The scarred boy grinned, and Izuku felt a flash of jealousy that he quickly pushed down. The scarred boy swung, but Izuku ducked beneath it, instead swinging his foot out to trip him. It worked perfectly and the scarred boy fell, so Izuku turned his attention back towards the guard, ducking under his swing as he attempted to throw Izuku off balance as well. From the corner of his eyes, Izuku saw the purple-haired boy slinking towards them, using the shadows to hide, probably hoping to surprise them. Izuku knew it wouldn't work on him, but didn't know about the other boy. Izuku slammed his full body into the guard, knocking him off balance, then kneed him twice in the face, easily bloodying it. The guard kicked Izuku back, and the scarred boy jumped in, punching him in the back of the head. The guard spun around again, but was too slow to dodge Izuku's kick towards his shins. The guard went down like a fly, and the scarred boy helped Izuku to push the heavy guard out of the ring. Loud cheering was heard, and both Izuku and the scarred boy jumped back, just in time to avoid getting smacked down by the purple-haired kid. The 3 boys took a moment to stare at each other. Izuku briefly wondered if under different circumstances, they might have been classmates, or maybe even friends. Now, they had to basically kill each other. None of the boys were dumb. They knew there was a punishment for whoever lost. They just didn't know the exact things that would happen. Like Izuku, it was his little sister's life. That thought was enough to make Izuku break the moment, and he jumped at the scarred boy first. He swung, and since the scarred boy wasn't expecting it, it hit, knocking him to the ground, where the purple-haired went to kick him. Instead, Izuku then jumped onto the purple-haired boy, punching him over and over again, legs wrapped around his shoulders. He stopped only to swing the boy, so he flipped and landed with a big crunch. Izuku was sure he injured the purple-haired boy's foot, but the tape muffled any screams or curses, and only a muffled groan of pain could be heard. The scarred boy took the moment to swing himself at Izuku as well, but Izuku retaliated, and both dodged rather than take the hit. They were all 3 panting hard, and the purple-haired boy was struggling to stand up. The entire stadium was cheering and laughing when a loud voice came over it all, startling everyone. "Put your hands in the air. You're all under arrest." Instant chaos. Everyone suddenly started rushing everywhere, and the exits were being blocked off by the police. Izuku and the scarred boy looked at each other, before both rushing to the sides of the cages and trying to undo the locks. The purple-haired boy pushed himself up and quickly joined. It was no use. The cages had been meant to hold up to 10 full-sized men, all fighting and throwing each other everywhere. It was high quality. There was no way 3 boys could open it from the inside, and everyone else was too busy trying to escape to bother open the cage for them. With a sigh of defeat, the purple-haired boy was the first to stop trying. He instead started focusing on trying to take off the duct tape wrapped around his head. Everyone else was so busy being arrested or trying not to be, so no one noticed the 3 boys, or even spared them a passing glance, and soon enough, the scarred boy also gave up, instead sitting on the floor and watching the running gang members and police. Izuku was the only one messing with the locks, but after another solid 20 minutes had passed, even he concluded there was just no way to open it from the inside. Izuku looked at the 2 boys. The purple-haired boy couldn't reach where the duct tape started, and was therefore struggling badly to get it off. The scarred boy was simply watching the following events unfold, with a blank look on his face. Izuku made a split-second decision. He walked over to the purple-haired boy and yanked hard on the duct tape in the back, causing the boy to give a muffled yip of pain, but it worked, and the duct tape ripped into 2, allowing the purple-haired boy to quickly remove the rest of it himself. The scarred boy and Izuku both watched the purple-haired kid as he removed the last of the duct tape. The piece on his lips. The imprints from the duct tape where it was stuck onto his face looked pale and clean compared to the rest of his body, showing how tightly it had been on. When he removed the last piece, both Izuku and the scarred boy looked away. His mouth was bloody, lip busted even worse than Izuku's. But worst of all were the thin scars weaving back and forth between his lips, showing where someone had stitched his mouth together. Izuku decided that must have been one of the cruelest things imaginable. He's sure if Hisashi had thought of that, Izuku would be the one with the stitched mouth here. "Thank you," the purple-haired boy said, even though his voice was raspy and obviously hadn't been used in a while. Izuku gulped and picked up his hands, quickly signing back to the boy. Asterisk, "You're welcome." It could have happened to anyone. Star. Both boys looked surprised. Then embarrassed. "Sorry, I don't know Sing language," the purple-haired boy muttered. Izuku thought they were being really polite considering they were just trying to kill each other about an hour beforehand. Todoroki Shoto, the scarred boy, spoke, without losing his posture. "I know sign." The kid said, "You're welcome." "It could have happened to anybody." The purple-haired boy nodded. "Hitoshi Shinso." The 2 boys looked at Izuku expectantly, who blinked at them. Seriously? Izuku was surprised they were even bothering with such small talk. He had thought that the thank you would have been the end of it. "Izuku Midoriya," he signed to Todoroki anyways. Asterisk, "Please don't call me that. Call me Deku if you must." Star. Izuku turned away while Todoroki repeated everything to Shinso. Things were starting to clear up, so Izuku was sure a member would notice them soon, and they would be able to escape with the rest. Only problem, Izuku didn't see any more free members. The place had been cleared out, except for all the police, who were handcuffing people and repeating their stupid justice lines, which made Izuku want to scream. Then said handcuffed people were getting thrown into cars, driven away, then more cars would appear. There didn't seem to be an end. "I don't think we're getting out of here," Shinso said, voicing the boy's thoughts. "At least not free," Todoroki added. Izuku shrugged. "I wasn't free before either," he signed, almost automatically. Todoroki repeated it out loud again, and Shinso nodded, feeling at his neck where his collar had previously been. Things once again fell silent for the 3 boys. Then, a yell of surprise from nearby, startling them all. "Someone tell me what the hell 3 boys are doing here?" The 3 boys turned towards the voice. They were kidding, right? Did the police seriously just now notice them? It's been over an hour. What exactly do you mean, what are 3 boys doing here? Todoroki testily asked. "Why, we're having a picnic. What else?" Shinso snapped. The officer at least had the decency to look embarrassed. Tsukachi, we need you over here. The boys watched as a stranger walked over to the officer. What, Gunhead? Can't you see I'm busy? Kids. Gunhead motioned towards Izuku and the others. Tsukachi raised an eyebrow. Did you just now notice them? They've been here a while. We just determined a while ago they weren't going anywhere and therefore weren't high priority. Guess it's nice to know we weren't totally ignored, Izuku testily signed, and Todoroki snickered before repeating it to Shinso. Tsukachi crosses his arms. You can relax. We all know you're here. The man turned towards Gunhead. Well, now we all know you're here. Gunhead looked at the ground, embarrassed. Sorry. You know sign? Izuku was surprised. Now there were two people here who knew sign. Yeah, Tsukachi signed back, instead of responding. Shinso was starting to feel bad. Hey Todoroki, teach me a bit of sign? Why should I? He coolly responded. 'Cause it seems like we're gonna be here a while, Shinso shrugged. The three boys turned towards Gunhead and Tsukachi. You are, Tsukachi agreed, before walking off to go work with someone else. I'll find you guys some food. You must be hungry, Gunhead instead responded, walking off as well. Todoroki turned back towards Shinso. Let's get started. At least 2 hours have passed, Izuku decided. Gunhead had, true to his word, brought them some sandwiches earlier, with a bottle of water. They had all eaten it up, and Todoroki had been teaching Shinso simple phrases the entire time. It was a good combo. Todoroki was surprisingly good at teaching, and Shinso was a fast learner, with a slightly photographic memory that helped. But now all the others had been arrested, and it was the three boys' turn. Except the police didn't know what to do with them. They had finally decided to question them, so were working on trying to open the cage. Izuku was worried to say the least. Hisashi would know by now that he was captured, and he was worried sick about Arie. It got so bad, even the police started to notice something was wrong with him. Hey, check on your friend, would ya? Gunhead finally asked Todoroki. Todoroki sighed. He's not my friend, but still turned to Izuku expectantly. When Izuku didn't sign anything, Todoroki signed. Are you all right? Izuku lifted his hands to sign fine, but couldn't get himself to, and instead, just started shaking all over again. He's fine, Todoroki called back, watching Izuku carefully. Gunhead didn't look convinced, but left it be. Shinso wasn't fooled. Hey, seriously, what's wrong with you? Izuku started to shake his head, but stopped, and instead curled into a ball. He started pulling at his bandages, and soon they slid off entirely, exposing his blood-soaked head. Oh shit! A police officer yelled, getting a good look at him. First aid over here. Get that lock undone now. Now the police were hurrying about, but Izuku didn't care. His ears were ringing, and everything was spinning. He had to get out of here. The second the cage door was opened, Izuku instantly jumped up and ran towards it, elbowing the officer at the door, who fell back in surprise and pain. Izuku took off, leaving behind the other two boys and officers, weaving through them all, and dodging all the hands. Izuku wasn't one of the best fighters for nothing. Grab him! Officers yelled, as everyone tried to, but failed. Right at the exit, as Izuku slammed the door open, a pair of hands managed to grab him. The grip was tight and strong, and Izuku recognized this officer from somewhere. Tashinori! A relieved yell came from one of the officers. Thank God! Shit, Izuku thought, and immediately started wiggling. Oh, hold on there. Everything's all right, kid, the man said, trying to fix his grip on Izuku. Izuku bit down as hard as he could on the man's hand, and was instantly dropped, and rewarded with a yell of pain. Izuku jumped up and ran. He raced out the exit, and headed back the route Izuku had briefly seen on the way to the fighting place. It wasn't long before he was lost. Izuku had several police officers on his tail too, to make it worse. He was tiring, old wounds were reopening, and his feet were burning from the previous beating. Izuku knew he wouldn't last much longer. And then Izuku ran right into Twice. Shit! Twice yelled as he saw the police. Izuku glanced behind him, and saw a furious Hisashi, Calm Stain, and Kenji, who was on the phone. Where was Jiren? Twice reacted quickly, grabbing Izuku and putting a gun to his head. "Sorry kid," he whispered, then spoke louder to the police who had stopped at the site. "Stop. Come any closer and I'll kill the kid." "Whoa, there's no need for that. Release the kid and we can talk." Toshinori tried to reason. Hisashi rolled his eyes. "Izuku," he snapped. "You lost." Izuku paled. For a moment, the officers, hell even the villains, thought he had seen a ghost. Izuku shook his head desperately. "No," he whispered. Toshinori looked shocked. Wasn't this the kid who did the sign? He decided to ask Tsukachi when they saw each other again. Izuku raised his voice. "Please no, you can't. I'll beat them. I'll kill them if I have to. Please, leave her alone." Izuku was seconds away from full-on panic. He had to keep his cool and be rational. Izuku knew that. But right now, he couldn't. All Izuku could think about was Arie trapped in his room. He had told her to stay. Izuku was going to lose Arie. "No." Hisashi rolled his eyes again, in annoyance. "Relax. We'll get you another little girl if it's that big a deal. But this one goes." He waved at Kenji, who showed the phone to Izuku. Izuku saw it was a videotape, happening currently, and could only watch and plead in desperation as he watched Jiren and his mom, Inko, break down his door with a bat. The officers and Toshinori were confused to why the boy was crying and watching a video, but just figured he was scared. After all, he was just a kid. And the officers couldn't hear the villains. Poor kid. They had to end this fast. Izuku let out a scream of agony as the door broke, and the two entered on a crying and freaking out Arie. Izuku started to thrash, yelling and pleading with his father, while never turning his sight from the phone. "Please. I promise to never disobey again. I'll always clean up without asking. I'll do whatever the fucking hell you want. I won't hesitate anymore. I'll get better and be your toy, but please leave her alone." Izuku started to sob even harder as Inko grabbed Arie, dragging her down the stairs, and Arie let out a cry of pain. They dragged her to the living room, when Arie suddenly reared up and smashed her head against Inko's as hard as she could, causing Inko to cuss and drop the girl. Arie winced from the pain, but jumped up and ran out the door as fast as she possibly could. Izuku watched as Jiren ran after her with the camera and gun, still sobbing quietly. Izuku gave out another pained yell as Arie tripped at the edge of a hill and went skidding off the side, so just her fingertips were hanging on. The police officers were starting to get restless, and finally the rest of the police cars from the cage fight appeared behind them, helping to provide backup. Tsukachi got out of the car, and Toshinori got a glimpse of the other two boys, handcuffed in the back. "I thought this kid was mute?" Toshinori said, as his friend walked up. Tsukachi watched as Izuku thrashed and screamed and cussed. "I thought he was too." Izuku wanted to kill. He wanted to scream his throat out and save Arie. But instead he was stuck watching the video. Izuku watched, still sobbing, tears pouring down his face, as Jiren slowly stared to step on Arie's fingers, causing them to fall, one by one, until one was left. Izuku was screaming. There was nothing he could do. He was fucking useless. Izuku had never felt more useless. There was his little sister, the only thing he still loved in this world, about to die. And Izuku could do nothing. Izuku watched, eyes red and teary, throat dry and itchy, as Jiren brought out his gun and shot the last finger. Izuku gave the loudest scream yet with the gunshot, nearly covering it up. Nearly. The camera zoomed in on Arie's body as it fell down. All the way to the bottom of the hill, where it splashed into the water. Out of sight. His little sister was dead. Arie was dead. Izuku felt himself collapse, as his life lost all meaning. Izuku's head was spinning. He couldn't believe what he had seen. Arie was gone. Arie was dead. What was he still doing? Izuku didn't know anymore. He faintly heard some yelling, and felt himself being snatched up again. Someone was shaking Izuku's collar. Probably not an officer, he decided slowly. An officer wouldn't be this rough. Or kill Arie. His sister was gone. Izuku thought about the future for a moment. He couldn't do it. Izuku can't live without Arie. He absolutely refused. Izuku needed an escape. Izuku looked up at Twice, the one shaking him. Come on, snap out of it, kid. We need you to run and go back to the base on your own. Shoot me. Izuku's voice was firm, and tears were still streaming down his face, making his vision blurry. Twice looked confused. So did Hisashi. Shoot you? Why? Izuku met Hisashi's surprised gaze. Kill me. I'm done. Hisashi sighed. Look, if this is about the girl, I already said we'll get you another one. Shoot me, goddammit. Izuku yelled. He was so done with fucking everything. Arie can't just be replaced. Hisashi should know that of all people. Boss, maybe you shouldn't have? Kenji trailed off at Hisashi's glare. Izuku was screaming and begging for someone to shoot him. Twice actually dropped him in shock, and even Stain backed up slightly from the boy. Stain decided this kid was serious. Apparently, so did Hisashi. Look, get over it. Hisashi sighed in exasperation. It's a girl. She was my life. Izuku yelled back. Okay, you're being overdramatic. Get over yourself. Hisashi narrowed his eyes, though he was beginning to think maybe he had been just a little rash. Just shoot me. That's all it's going to fucking take. Izuku yelled again. Hisashi nodded. Yup, he decided he had made a mistake. Now the question was if Izuku could still be useful like this. Could he possibly connect with another little girl? Izuku screamed in agony again, and tried to grab the gun from Twice, who had to back away from Izuku. He collapsed to the ground once again. Hisashi decided no. Leave him, he commanded. He's useless to us now. Twice and Kenji looked surprised, them hesitant. Boss won't be happy. Twice muttered. Do you see his state? He's going to kill himself in the next hour anyways, Hisashi spat. Kenji and Twice looked at the sobbing boy on the ground, and knew he was right. Hey! Twice called to the police, who were trying to hear what was being said. We're leaving you the boy if you let us go scot-free. The police hesitated, and started talking to each other quietly, but Tashinori and Tsukachi stepped in quickly. We agree. They called. Hisashi went first, quickly disappearing into the alleys, Twice, Stain, and Kenji right behind him. The second they were out of range from Izuku, the police rushed forward to the sobbing boy, who had now clambered up. Tashinori went to see if any of the villains were still in sight, but no movement could be detected. They had a car waiting. A police officer informed him, they're gone. Tashinori nodded, and turned back towards Izuku. Tsukachi was standing over him with a blanket, and was talking with Gunhead and 13. Tashinori went over to join them, and realized their guns had been removed from their belts, and were resting in a nearby car. What's with the guns? Tashinori asked. Everyone went quiet and turned to Izuku. The boy looked up, and Tashinori almost jumped at how tired the boy looked. Shoot me, Izuku begged once again. Tashinori nodded in understanding, and stared in shock and fear from how determined the boy sounded. All Izuku wanted was to die. Couldn't he get what he wanted just this once? After a couple of minutes of pleading with the officers, Izuku shut up. If they wouldn't grant his request, he wouldn't talk. He didn't care anyways. Izuku didn't want anything to do with them. After a few minutes of questioning, and no responses from Izuku, vocal or sign, the officers gave up. The boy won't tell us anything. Gunhead exclaimed in frustration, once they were a good distance away from the boy. We don't know what he saw, but it really affected him, 13 agreed. His name's Izuku Midoriya, Tsukachi added, we got that from the other two boys. They said he didn't talk, but communicated with sign, and didn't seem to have a death wish earlier. Tashinori nodded. So it was that video they showed him. We know that, what now? The four officers were silent. Well, what about Aizawa? 13 asked hesitantly. None of the boys will tell us much, and literal hours ago they were fighting in a cage fight, and pretty damn good at it too from what we saw. You don't get that good overnight, Gunhead agreed. And have you seen their scars? The officers turned towards Tsukachi's car this time, where the two boys were watching Izuku, and doing some sign. Tsukachi's mind went to Todoroki's left eye, and Shinsu's lips. Not that Izuku was without his fair share too. You know what? I agree, Tsukachi added, surprising everyone. They all have their stories and definitely aren't ready for foster care or some shit. Toshinori thought it over. I think it would do them good. Those kids, they treat each other like a family. They care about each other, and I think it would be good for all three of them. There was a moment of silence. 13 was the first to speak. So, are we agreed then? Everyone agreed. Guess I need to make a phone call, Toshinori sighed, and Tsukachi nodded. I'll make the arrangements now. Izuku laid in the same spot for about half an hour before the officers started to dispense. It wasn't long before Tsukachi came back with the officer. This is 13, he introduced. Izuku didn't care. He didn't bother respond. 13 grabbed Izuku's arms, hoisting him up, and started moving him towards Tsukachi's car, with the other two boys. Todoroki and Shinso went quiet when the door opened, and 13 pushed Izuku into the car. When the door shut, nothing was said. It was Izuku who broke the silence. He looked up at the two boys, cheeks still wet, but out of tears. An empty sob made his way to Izuku's throat. Please kill me. Todoroki and Shinso were shocked and turned to look at each other. Izuku wanted them to kill him? What had happened out there? Shinso and Todoroki gulped and looked back at Izuku. Are you serious? Shinso asked. Izuku gave a slow nod. Please, he begged, voice cracking. They took everything he signed when his voice wouldn't work. Todoroki took in a deep breath. He recognized that look. He knew it all too well. That was his sister's look before she left, when their dad had tricked her into thinking Todoroki and her brothers were dead. She had gone missing that night. Shinso also understood the look. Whatever they had shown Izuku had killed him. Maybe not physically, but no matter what anyone said, Izuku was mentally dead. It would do only more pain to force him to live. Are you sure? Is there anything at all? Shinso felt his voice break. Todoroki couldn't get himself to say anything. Izuku shook his head. I watched it myself. I'm sure he signed slowly. Both Shinso and Todoroki understood. I can do it if you want? Shinso offered weakly. This wouldn't keep him up more than he already stayed up. Shinso was an insomniac. He knew the death would give him something to think about. Todoroki gave a slight nod. If you're sure, Izuku? He tried one last time. Izuku nodded, eyes completely dead. I don't know how to smile, Izuku signed. Todoroki nodded. He's sure, he said out loud, though he was pretty sure Shinso had gotten the message anyways. With a deep breath, Shinso held out his hands. Izuku easily grabbed them, desperately pulling them around his neck and tightening them for Shinso. Izuku sighed, and both Shinso and Todoroki saw how peaceful this was making him. With a finale nod, Shinso squeezed. Even while he was actively being choked, Izuku didn't fight or wince from the pain. He welcomed it. He tried holding his breath to make death come faster, but instincts made him gasp for breath. Black dots started covering his vision just as some yells from outside were heard. The door was flown open, and light filled the car. Izuku felt himself being yanked from Shinso's grasp, and Shinso was also yanked from the car. Todoroki was once again locked in it, but this time alone. No. No. Izuku started to sob again. He was right there. So close. Izuku had been within reach of Arie, and these people had to ruin it for them. He had finally found people who understood and were willing enough to help him, and these officers had to fucking ruin it. No. It's okay. You're safe now. Toshinori tried to reassure the boy. Izuku pushed Toshinori off of him hard. Don't you fucking get it? I don't want to be. Izuku pushed away from the officers and sobbed into himself. He curled up into a pathetic ball. Grit. Izuku couldn't even die right. He really was just a major screw-up. Every time an officer would try to get near him, Izuku would just shrink back even more, or growl at them, so eventually they stopped trying, and sufficed with just watching him. Toshinori finally turned his attention back to the other boy, Shinso, who was being yelled at by Tsukachi, 13 and Gunhead. Would you say something? You just tried to kill him. 13 finally snapped in anger. Shinso hadn't said anything, just hummed to himself the entire time. Finally, he responded. You don't understand, he stated. Understand what? Did you two get into an argument or something? Gunhead asked. No. He's already dead. No, he's not, Izuku's fine. He's right there. Are you making a threat? Tsukachi asked, confused. No. Shinso rolled his eyes, exasperated. Mentally idiots. Whatever they showed him, it broke him. He's dead. You're only causing him more pain by forcing him to live. It couldn't have been that bad. Gunhead sounded like he wasn't entirely convinced himself. Shinso smirked. Fine. Then let actions prove it to you. Go over to Izuku. He'll try to sit with him, see if he'll let you. After all, you did just ruin his life. Tashinori looked at Izuku. I'll go first. He walked over to the boy and sat down next to him. Instantly, Izuku backed away, glaring harshly at him. Tashinori backed up, surprised at the hate in his eyes. And Izuku relaxed. One by one, nearly every officer tried. Izuku wouldn't let anyone get anywhere near him. Finally, Shinso spoke up. Let me try. After a moment of hesitation, Tashinori agreed. They all watched in silence as Shinso slid next to Izuku with no problem, and Izuku looked at him. They held their breath, ready for him to slide away again, but instead, Izuku leaned against Shinso. The officers watched in complete shock. Shinso raised an eyebrow at them and gave them a smirk. You know what? I'm starting to understand why his mouth was duct-taped earlier, 13 muttered. Tsukachi gave her a light shove. Fine, you proved your point. Go back to the car. Take Izuku with you, but absolutely under no circumstances. Can you try that again? Understand? Tashinori asked. Shinso glared at them as he stood up and helped Izuku up. Fine. I won't. Izuku whimpered, but didn't protest, and Shinso helped him limp back to the car. An officer opened the door, and 13 got in the front to watch the boys this time. You two okay? Todoroki asked when they were both buckled in. Tsukachi got into the driver's seat and pulled out, glancing at the boys every now and then. Shinso gave a slight nod. Izuku didn't move, leaning heavily on Shinso. He felt his eyes start to close. Izuku had no will to stay awake, so soon, with the rocking of the car, Shinso found that Izuku was sleeping on his shoulder. Todoroki gave him a smirk, and Shinso inwardly groaned. He was never going to live this down. It was an hour-long ride, and all three boys had fallen asleep in the back. Tsukachi and 13 were surprised at how well they had gotten along, considering they had previously been trying to kill each other. They decided to ask them again when they woke up. In the meantime, the preparations had been made, and Tsukachi was going to take the kids to a place near UA school, a mental/rehabilitation hospital for kids. Basically a bigger foster care system for traumatized kids. The kids there were very close, like a family. Tsukachi's hope was that they could help Todoroki and Shinso lead normal lives again, and hopefully become less feisty. Those cage fights were not pretty. As for Izuku, Tsukachi was hoping they could get him to talk. Or sign. He would take anything at this point, just to say something other than shoot me, or kill me. Tsukachi hoped Izuku could even eventually get over whatever had been in that video, or at least tell them what his was. With one last glance at the sleeping boys, Tsukachi focused on the road and 13's directions. After all, it's not like this place was just on a GPS or something. You either knew where it was, or you didn't. When the car stopped, all three boys instantly woke up. Light sleepers, huh? Tsukachi joked, but from the look on their faces, he had a feeling it wasn't from anything good. Tsukachi has been hoping Izuku would sign something after some rest, but no such luck. Izuku sat, staring blankly at the floor. Nothing mattered anymore. What did he care if he was free? Arie was dead, so it was useless. Izuku missed her so much. Her voice, her hair, the way she'd always pout when Izuku wouldn't let her fix him up. Shinso nudged him, snapping him out of his thoughts. We're just staying at a hotel tonight, and we'll go to the place tomorrow, 13 explained to the boys as they followed her inside. Shinso couldn't help but stare as they walked in. It was huge and way more extravagant than anything he'd seen before. Casting a glance at the other two, he noticed Todoroki looked indifferent, bored almost, and Izuku was barely even moving. Izuku was walking between Shinso and Todoroki, but it was more like being lightly dragged. He clung onto Todoroki's right arm and Shinso's left, and the two were leading him, giving him small nudges when he stopped for too long. Izuku kept his eyes on the floor, and his face was void of emotions. While Tsukachi got the room key and talked to the front desk, 13 asked the boys if they wanted any food. "I'll take a coffee or energy drink," Shinso muttered. "I'll take a shot of vodka or something," Todoroki asked, rubbing his head. Absolutely not," 13 exclaimed. "You're way too young for that." Todoroki and Shinso gave her a look. "Yeah, 'cause we're old enough for cage fighting," Shinso grinned. "And being in a gang," Todoroki added. "And carrying guns and dash?" "Okay, I get it," 13 interrupted, "but you're still not having vodka or energy drinks." Todoroki and Shinso shrugged. "Why'd you ask then?" "You didn't have to actually get them anyways," Todoroki asked, tilting his head. 13 looked shocked. "Well, you still need food. We'll order food in the rooms, and you can have water," she decided. Tsukachi came back at that moment. "Let's go," he said, "room 201. The five walked in silence, not knowing what to say. Not really wanting to say anything. When they reached their room, they saw one big room with 2 beds and a couch. 13 and I will share that bed," Tsukachi said, pointing to the bed in front of the door. "Izuku, which do you want?" Shinso asked the silent boy. Izuku didn't respond, just stumbled over to the couch. Todoroki shrugged. "Guess we're sharing the bed," he said to Shinso. Shinso was watching Izuku carefully. "Does anyone have a first aid kit?" he finally asked. 13 looked at him. "Sure, it's on the bed actually. But does anyone need it?" Shinso looked at Izuku's head. "I don't think his hair is supposed to be that brownish red." Todoroki gave Izuku a careful look. "I never got much of a look at him," he admitted, "but I thought earlier, didn't he have bandages on?" Tsukachi froze. During all the excitement, he'd forgotten about any first aid. Yeah, we should do that." He reached forward for the first aid kit, but Shinso snatched it away first. "Oh, you two need to leave, or we'll just do it in the bathroom." "What? Why?" 13 asked, confused. Todoroki and Shinso shared a look. "You don't need to see this. It's not going to be pretty, and Izuku should choose for himself whether or not to show you. He's in no state for that right now, and you can relax. I have plenty of training with this stuff. We know what we're doing," Todoroki stated. "I think we should do it," Tsukachi tried to insist. Shinso easily shot it down. "He wouldn't let you anyways. I'm sorry, but you guys don't know anything about us. At least me and Todoroki here have a good sense of what's happened to him. Just let us handle this." Without another word, Todoroki and Shinso cautiously pushed Izuku towards the bathroom. They made sure to lock the door behind them. The officers would not want to see this. 13 and Tsukachi were left confused. How bad could that fight have gotten before they stopped it? Shinso sighed in relief. He knew Izuku would be covered in scars and cuts. Maybe some were even fresh. It wasn't right for them to see him like this. From what was already visible, he was already in bad shape. His left eye was swollen, his lip had been cleaned up, but clearly busted, his nose looked a little too red, and his neck was covered in bruises that were hard to see from his outfit. And that was from what was visible. Todoroki was honestly also a little scared at what they would find. He figured Izuku came from somewhere like him, but wasn't sure how bad it could be. Couldn't be much worse than his. Right? As Shinso and Todoroki started to peel off his shirt, they could only look at the damage that stared up at them. Oh, they were so wrong. This could be a problem. Izuku didn't move as they peeled off his shirt. He didn't care. Izuku was numb, but that was okay. Maybe he could get a release later. Izuku just wanted it all to go away. The lights were too bright. The smells were too strong. Everything was too loud. Shinso and Todoroki could only stare at the scars and wounds that littered his torso and stomach. Knives, wounds, and rips all across his chest. Bruises, black and purple and red from beatings. White lines that could have been from lashes, for God's sakes. Burns that went up and down his body. The worst was the white lines that trailed up and down his arms, and at his thighs. Cutting marks. This was going to be a problem, Shinso and Todoroki determined. The longer they looked, the worse it got, so instead they got to work on putting on fresh gauzes and bandages on his arms, chest, everywhere. Shinso wondered if he felt like a mummy yet. Carefully leading Izuku to the sink, he leaned his head back, using a towel to cushion his neck. They turned on the water and started rinsing the blood out of his hair, and slowly, bit by bit, removing some glass shards they saw. "How the hell were you able to fight us like this?" Todoroki exclaimed, exasperated. They worked for a while on his hair, before it was finally a shade of green. It was dull but there. Izuku's pants had been pushed up as far as possible without being too intrusive, and legs cleaned up as well. The burns had been worst on his feet, and Shinso wondered if that was a specific punishment from trying to run or something. Finally, after about 2 solid hours of work, Todoroki and Shinso declared they were done. They quickly cleaned up Izuku, and gave him some fresh clothes Tsukachi had picked up. Shinso made sure they fully covered his skin, as it was cold, and he wanted Izuku to be fully functional before he showed other people the markings. Shinso wanted it to be Izuku's choice to tell the others about it. But he couldn't really say much, when he wasn't exactly about to open up either. Shinso just wanted Izuku to be functional again. He had liked the boy from the second he had helped take off Shinsu's stupid duct tape. The duct tape had been a punishment for mouthing off again. It happened a lot. And Izuku had helped, without even knowing his name. Todoroki didn't know why he cared, to be honest. There was just something about the boy, about Izuku, that Todoroki felt the need to protect. Unlocking the door, Shinso and Todoroki led Izuku to the couch, where he collapsed once again. "Do you guys have any clue what they showed him?" 13 asked for the 100th time. Todoroki rolled his eyes. "We met him today. And we were trying to kill each other," Shinso reminded her. "Why do you 3 get along so well then?" 13 asked. Shinso shrugged. "We've all gone through something similar. It's just as simple as in the cage, we didn't have a choice. But now that we're out," Todoroki continued, "we're some of the only people who even have an idea of what he's gone through." 13 nodded. "I must admit, I still don't fully understand, but I have the basics. Detective Tsukachi will be back later with food. You can watch TV or something." Shinso and Todoroki looked at her, and instead just sat on the bed, trying to rest. It didn't come for any of them. Instead, their thoughts were plagued with memories and questions of what would come next. By the time Tsukachi got back with food, 13 was in the middle of a nap, and the 3 boys were silently laying eyes wide open, but unfocused. "Food's here," Tsukachi called, startling everyone. 13 yawned but stood up. "What time is it?" "Nearly 11. Tsukachi sighed. "After food you 3 need to go to sleep." Shinso raised an eyebrow, but didn't say anything. He pushed himself up, and sat at the table next to Todoroki. The 2 boys didn't wait. They dug right into the Chinese food. In Shinso's opinion, it was one of the best things he had ever eaten. Izuku didn't move from the couch. He had been staring out the window, as thoughts of Arie filled his head, messing with his thoughts. He wanted an out. "Hey, come eat, kid," Tsukachi said, trying to coax the boy to the table. Izuku didn't even glance at him. Todoroki stood with a small plate of food. "Here," he said, walking over to Izuku. Carefully, Todoroki tried to put the fork in Izuku's hand, but instead it just clattered to the floor. Todoroki picked up another fork and tried again, but this time firmly holding it in Izuku's hand. Slowly, bite by bite, Todoroki fed Izuku the food and made sure he swallowed before continuing. After about half the plate was done, Izuku tapped his side. Just once. Signaling he was done. Todoroki got the message and backed off. He needed Izuku to be able to trust him, and that meant respecting his limits. "That's all?" 13 asked, appalled. "He was done," Shinso said, on Todoroki's side. "You don't know how much or little he's eaten in the past. You don't want him throwing it all up?" Tsukachi and 13 reluctantly nodded in agreement. They guessed that was true. "I need to make another phone call," Tsukachi sighed, getting up. "I'll be back in like 5 minutes. 13 looked hesitant. "I needed to grab some paperwork. It should only take a minute, but I have to go now to get it in time." The two officers turned towards the three boys. Shinso raised an eyebrow at them. Problem? It's literally a minute alone. They'll be fine. There are locks on the door and cameras. It's not like they can go anywhere, Tsukachi decided. We'll be back, 13 said to the three boys. Don't do anything stupid. With that, they left the room, leaving the boys to their own quiet imagination. I can't take this. I'm going to grab a drink, Todoroki muttered when the door shut. Shinso looked like he wanted to argue, but changed his mind last minute. Grab me a coffee? There's a vending machine on the end of the hallway. Todoroki nodded in acknowledgement and left. Now it was just Shinso and Izuku. Shinso glanced at Izuku. The boy was staring at the balcony, not moving. And Shinso had to pee. Be careful, he told Izuku, just in case he tried anything as he got up and shut the bathroom door. Izuku finally dropped the tension from his shoulders. He was finally alone. Izuku knew what he wanted to do, he had been thinking it for a while now. He stood and stumbled to the balcony, just standing there as the wind blew in his face. Izuku looked down. They were the second story, so Izuku would have to be careful of his angle to get it done. That was okay, he decided. Izuku could make do. With a last breath of air, Izuku climbed over to the other side, hanging over the edge of the balcony. He was about to jump, when a yell from behind surprised him. Kid, what the hell are you doing? Caught off guard, Izuku fell down, but not where he wanted to. Instead of falling into some big rocks he knew would kill him, Izuku fell into a big fountain that helped cushion his fall, but still kept him both conscious and alive. His foot burned like crazy, and his arm felt wrong and numb, but rather than that, Izuku was fine. He had failed. Izuku felt pathetic. He wanted to scream once again, but his voice was long gone. Now tears just slipped down his cheek. Before he could move, a pair of hands yanked him out of the fountain and upright. What the hell were you doing? 13 exploded, looking Izuku over. Your arm's broken and it looks like you sprained your foot. Do you know how much worse that could have been? Izuku didn't bother respond, just looked to the side. He was useless. Izuku was a worthless coward who couldn't get anything done right. He deserved to suffer. A man behind 13 sighed heavily. The man looked exhausted, and as if he was regretting even being there. Looks like I have a new problem child to deal with, he sighed. So clumsy. 13 groaned, but picked up Izuku and started walking back towards the hotel. Izuku, this is Aizawa. You're going to be staying with him for a while. She decided not to elaborate. Aizawa looked at the boy in 13's arms, unresponsive and unreactive. He had obviously been through a lot. Can he talk? Aizawa asked. Yes, but he doesn't, 13 responded. Tsukachi has his file for you. Aizawa nodded and reached their door same time as Tsukachi. Tsukachi looked at Izuku. He didn't. He did, 13 sighed. Where are the other two? The two officers looked at each other before slamming the door open. All three simultaneously groaned in defeat. Sitting at the table was Todoroki and Shinso, with an half-empty bottle of beer and 10 empty shot glasses in front of them. What the actual fuck, Aizawa muttered to himself, and at the same time Tsukachi reached over and snatched the bottle away from the boys. Shinso drunkenly tried to grab it back, but failed and instead ended up shoving an empty shot glass. It fell to the ground with a thunk. And, it's bedtime, 13 muttered, not even sure how to react. Tsukachi went to help Shinso to his bed, then Todoroki, but was surprised when Todoroki stood by himself. Great. A functional drunk, Tsukachi muttered. Todoroki looked at Izuku, being bandaged and put in a cast on the couch. You ruined it again. He's going to hate himself even more now, you know. 13 sighed. Okay, but I have an idea. With a sigh, 13 took out a pair of handcuffs and snapped one around his wrists, the other around the leg of the couch. Izuku tried to yank himself free, but with no avail, gave up, and resumed watching the balcony once again in distaste. How useless could he get? Aizawa watched the three of them. This could be a problem, he repeated tiredly. The kids were confused. Aizawa had told them they were gaining 3 new kids. It had been over 2 years now without anyone coming or going. Who were these kids? They weren't informed much, but that Aizawa would be leaving that night to see them and would bring them by in the morning after breakfast. He warned them to be prepared for anything. After Aizawa had left, Mike gathered them all in the main room. Look guys, I know this is a lot of change, but please, just hang with us here. I wonder who the new kids are, Tsuyu whispered. Mike brightened a little. The girl really was recovering and going back to speaking her mind. That was good progress. Are they boys or girls? Mina added, looking at Mike hopefully. Mike shrugged. Sorry, I don't really know anything yet. We don't even have the files yet. We just found about them a couple hours ago. So no names, huh? Katsuki said. No names, Mike confirmed. Momo sighed. Were you told anything? Mike gave her a half-hearted shrug. Momo growled. She hated not knowing stuff. Well, it sounds like there's nothing we can do then, Kirishima spoke. So can we go back to video games now? Kirishima smiles, showing off all his sharp teeth, when Mike nodded. Then, realized what he was doing, and snapped his mouth shut, staring at the floor in embarrassment. Katsuki rolled his eyes, and playfully swatted the back of his head. You're fine, Demus. Everyone here loves your teeth. Kirishima didn't respond, but did straighten himself slightly. That's right. He had a family here. They all did. The next morning, Mike ran through the dorms, banging on a pot with a metal spoon. Up and at him everyone, he yelled. Shut the fuck up. We're awake. Katsuki yelled back. There were groans from everyone as they pulled themselves up. Katsuki got dressed quickly and headed downstairs to the kitchen, where others were already waiting. When are they coming? Uraraka nervously asked. Well, there was an incident. Mike started, looking at all the kids. They noticed Mike looked worried, and that was never a good sign. What happened? Mina asked, already worried for the safety of these new kids. There's a boy, he was really bad off. He tried to, well, Mike had no idea how to say this. As he struggled to find the right words, Katsuki spoke up. He tried to kill himself? Mike gave a nod, and continued. Yeah. He's all right, but they need to make a stop by the hospital for a checkup, then they'll be on their way. So we can expect them after dinner time. Will we be awake when they arrive? Tsuyu whispered again. Oh. You'll have to meet them in the morning. Everyone went quiet. They didn't like the idea that one of the boys had already tried to kill themselves. Well, on that note, let's head to the park today, Mike offered. Everyone groaned, suicidal boy forgotten. They hated the park, always being leered or stared at. Actually, they hated any outside contact at all. After breakfast, Mike grinned, as if he was a genius for thinking of the idea. Fuck, Katsuki muttered. Watch your language, Ida sighed, though he agreed wholeheartedly with the angry boy. He hated the park. Mike had eventually dragged them all to the park, though he decided to have lunch there instead of right after breakfast. Right from the start, things were bad. With only one guardian there instead of the normal 2 or more, Mike could only keep away certain kids. Mike didn't notice when Mina was dragged off by some older brats who thought she looked cool. Kirishima instantly followed behind them, as he rarely left her sight and vice versa. Kirishima found them behind a building, poking sticks at Mina's strange skin, and calling her names like alien and witch. Kirishima acted fast, pushing the 2 boys away from Mina, and baring his pointy teeth at them. Oh look, Shark Boy came to save his alien sister. They should be burned at the stake. One of the boys taunted. Mina felt tears pool at her eyes, but pushed them down. She could cry later. For now, she had to act. You're nothing but a bunch of cowards. Mina yelled at them, and idiots. What did you say, freak? The second boy growled lowly. Mina gulped. You heard me, she sputtered. Back off, Kirishima added. You're way older than us. Don't you have better things to do? The first boy jumped forward, slamming Kirishima against the wall, then punched him square in the face. The second boy grabbed Mina when she tried to rush forward, and held her pinned back, as Mina fought and wiggled to help Kirishima. Mina gave a loud scream when Kirishima was punched again, and blood sprayed everywhere. As the boy continued to punch Kirishima, bloodying and bruising his entire face, Mina yelled and fought, occasionally squinting her eyes shut as it got bad. "What the fuck do you two think you're doing?" Katsuki growled from the alleyway entrance, storming up to the two boys. "Do you have a problem with it?" The boy punching Kirishima paused to ask him. Katsuki smirked and looked at him for a minute, before walking up and punching him square in the nose, instantly bloodying it. "What the fuck?" the boy yelled, dropping Kirishima to the ground. Kirishima collapsed, totally unconscious, and Mina gave a soft cry. Katsuki stared at the boy holding Mina. "Put her down now," he growled. The boy was staring at his friend and reluctantly released Mina. "Whatever, dude, it's not worth it," he mumbled, then instantly turned around and raced off. Katsuki stared at the other boy until he also got up and slowly followed the direction his friend had gone in, still nursing his nose. "Freaks," he muttered, then took off running when Katsuki leaped at him again. "Fucking assholes," Katsuki growled, while helping Mina to pick up Kirishima. Together, the two lugged the unconscious boy back to Mike, who took one look at them and called for everyone to come back and get the recovery girl ready. For the rest of the day, Kirishima stayed in bed, Mina never leaving his side, and Katsuki didn't leave the training room once. Aizawa and Tsukachi were pulling up to the building, as they had decided 13 would stay behind and return to work. The hospital trip had gone well, and all three boys had been vaccinated and given checkups, but now it was 1 in the morning, and Todoroki and Izuku were dead asleep. Shinso was awake, but quietly staring out the window. Izuku now had a cast on his arm and a tracking bracelet so they could keep a better eye on him. His foot was sprained and wrapped up, along with his head which had been fully cleaned, and several stitches from removing some extra glass that had been missed. The doctors wanted to do a full body checkup on him, but Izuku had growled whenever anyone tried to touch his clothes. "Shinso, we're here," Tsukachi whispered to the boy, and Shinso gave him a thumbs up. "Hey, we're here," he repeated, just a bit louder, and Tsukachi and Aizawa groaned as both Izuku and Todoroki jolted awake. "We were going to just carry them in," Tsukachi muttered. Shinso blinked at them while Izuku and Todoroki stretched and got out of the car. "That's asking for a bloody nose." Aizawa opened his mouth to ask why, but got distracted by a light in the upper stairs window. "The training room." "Shit!" he exclaimed. Katsuki was still awake. The three boys swiveled to him. Aizawa assumed he had startled them, but all three looked ready to bolt. He realized that his outburst had terrified them. Sorry, just one of the kids. Are still awake." They nodded, but didn't relax like they had before. Aizawa was sure if anyone even so much as put a hand on their shoulder, they would go running or perhaps just jump. "For now, when we get inside, you boys can just sleep. In the morning or whenever you wake up, come downstairs to the kitchen. I'll be waiting." "All right, I have to go," Tsukachi said as he opened the door for them. "I don't have permission to be in here." "Sorry. I'll come visit though, eventually." Izuku didn't respond, like normal, and Todoroki didn't really care, but Shinso offered a half-hearted wave of goodbye right as the door shut, so he missed Tsukachi's small smile. "Let's go," Aizawa muttered. "Make sure to be quiet. The others are sleeping. You each have your own rooms." The three boys wandered aimlessly behind Aizawa as he stopped at the first door. "Todoroki, this is you." Shinso peeked into Todoroki's room and saw Todoroki already sitting on the bed, staring at the ceiling. He didn't have a window, but had a nice space room with some books, drawing supplies, and clothes already supplied. Shinso supposed his and Izuku's rooms would be similar. Aizawa motioned for the two boys to follow, and once again they did. The next door, Aizawa pointed to Shinso. No words were said this time as Shinso went in, and Izuku didn't bother try to see inside. He didn't care. Finally, after slightly nudging Izuku along, and taking the stairs because for some reason the boy absolutely refused to take the elevator, they arrived at Izuku's door. It was right across from the training room, so Izuku could see the light, but Aizawa wasn't surprised the boy didn't seem to care. Aizawa didn't think the boy cared about anything. Probably just tired. Helping him into the room, Izuku sat on the bed and didn't move until the door had long been shut. Even then, it was only to glance at his surroundings, and then stop at a balcony. Izuku had a balcony. He guessed that meant Tsukachi hadn't actually told Aizawa yet, Or Aizawa hadn't read their files. Aizawa had probably misinterpreted what happened at the hotel. But he was taking this chance. In a way, Izuku considered this a gift. After shutting Izuku's door, Aizawa made his way to the training room, more than slightly annoyed. He stood at the door for a minute, watching the boy in front of him as he ran in the treadmill, so caught up, and a sweaty mess, Aizawa knew Katsuki hadn't noticed him. Katsuki! Aizawa finally snapped, causing the boy to jump and slide off the treadmill, signaling the emergency cutoff. Aizawa, you're back? Katsuki sputtered. Aizawa gave him an unimpressed look. Yeah, I'm back. But, you've lost training room privileges, we'll talk more in the morning. Katsuki opened his mouth to protest, but paused at Aizawa's look. He looked stressed, more than usual. And extremely worried. Katsuki didn't want to make it worse, so he reluctantly nodded his head, muttered a night, and headed to his room. He was about to open the door, when he realized a light was on in the room next to his. Katsuki considered just leaving him, it was probably a new kid, but heard a crash and ran to the door, flinging it open. Katsuki froze. Standing on the balcony of that room was a green-haired boy. And he looked ready to jump. Katsuki could only stare at the green-haired boy as he inched to the end of the balcony. Katsuki saw he already had a broken arm and his foot was wrapped up, along with having his whole head in bandages and being badly bruised in other places. What had happened to this boy? It didn't matter. Izuku had taken a deep breath, about to jump again, and Katsuki acted. He raced forward, grabbing the boy at the exact second he jumped, nearly flinging himself over the balcony as well. Last second Katsuki caught his foot in the ledge, causing them both to jerk to a stop. Katsuki wanted to cuss, but was too busy gritting his teeth and trying to keep up the boy, which was admittedly easier than he had originally thought. The boy was light. Katsuki gritted his teeth and swung, throwing the boy back over the ledge. Katsuki watched as he rolled, but landed against his bed with a soft thud, and didn't move. Katsuki used his foot to bang on the window below him. 3 times, as hard as possible, before he had to stop from fear of falling. The window was thrown open, and Mina tiredly peeked his head out. Who's there? Mina gave a yell of surprise when he saw Katsuki hanging there. Help me the fuck down. Katsuki growled, already exhausted from his earlier workout. Mina did, backing away from the window so Katsuki could swing himself into his room. Katsuki hit the ground and rolled, stopping at the door, where he jumped up with a grunt and raced back upstairs, Mina right behind him. Katsuki slammed the new boy's door back open, only to see the boy hadn't moved an inch and was still laying on the ground, clutching his head. Mina saw he was crying. What the fuck were you doing? Katsuki yelled, and Mina looked from him to the boy in confusion. Katsuki sat down with a sigh when the boy didn't respond. Mina, go get Aizawa. Now. Mina realized Katsuki had used her real name, so decided it must be serious, and raced downstairs. She used the stairs to go faster, and nearly broke down Aizawa and Mike's room door slamming on it. They opened it nearly immediately, and looked at Mina in shock. What's wrong? Mike asked, but Mina was so out of breath, she just pointed up the stairs. Boy, she huffed, Katsuki. Mike and Aizawa looked at each other before racing back up the stairs, leaving Mina to slowly but surely follow behind. They ran up to Izuku's room and saw Izuku on the ground, crying, and Katsuki moving furniture to block the balcony's entrance off. Aizawa realized what had happened and mentally screamed. I'm an idiot, he muttered. I didn't realize this was the boy. I thought it was Todoroki. Mike looked at him, but didn't force an explanation, instead focusing on the boys in front of him. Katsuki, what happened? Leave out nothing. After Katsuki had explained everything, all eyes, including Mina's who had finally made it, turned back towards Izuku, who had still refused to move except to curl into a ball. Izuku couldn't do it. It was like a curse that was following him around. He wanted to, but it's like the entire world was against him. Izuku really was useless for anything. Alright, Katsuki, go to sleep. Mina, go to your room. Kirishima's fine, and you know you're not supposed to be in other kids' rooms after lights out, Aizawa tiredly ordered. Mina and Katsuki opened their mouths to argue, but took one more look at the boy on the floor and decided they had enough to deal with, so reluctantly left. As they walked back to their rooms, Mina stopped Katsuki. "All right, what's wrong?" Katsuki opened his mouth to deny it, but froze. "Don't know. That kid was familiar, and I don't know from where." I think it was from before," Katsuki slowly said. It bothered Katsuki that he had no memory from before the fire. He remembered what caused the fire to the current day, but nothing before. All his memories gone. And this boy, well, there was just a nagging feeling somewhere in his head he couldn't lose him again. But when had he ever lost him? "Well, don't spend too much time on it," Mina ordered. "It'll either come to you, or it won't. There's no forcing it." Katsuki reluctantly nodded, before saying goodnight and shutting his door. Being left to his own thoughts was always excruciating. Morning couldn't come fast enough. The next morning, everyone except for Mina and Katsuki, and the new kids of course, were gathered in the living room. They were watching a show, when Mike stumbled into the room, yawning, and a big cup of coffee. "Mike, you look tired," Tsuyu notes, watching the man. Mike nodded. "We had some trouble last night." "Is that why Katsuki and Mina aren't here?" Momo asked. "No. They're just still asleep." That surprised everyone. Katsuki was normally up before 5, and Mina was always up by 8. It was nearing 10 now. What had happened? Before the new kids come down, I would like to say, there's one boy, Izuku Midoriya, who is not allowed to be anywhere near balconies. And he cannot under any circumstances be left alone. "Understood?" Mike asked. When he got nods from everyone, he finally settled down on the couch with them to watch the movie that was on. An hour had passed, and now both Katsuki and Mina were up, but avoiding any questions about what had happened last night. They had no wish to revive that. But they couldn't seem to get that boy, Izuku, out of their heads. It was lunch, and Aizawa finally decided to go wake up the boys and drag them out to meet everyone. He walked into Todoroki's room first, only to see he was up and doing push-ups. "Why didn't you come downstairs for breakfast?" Aizawa asked the boy, startling him. Todoroki didn't know what to say. Was he nervous? Todoroki wasn't used to just being allowed to leave a room without permission, and he's sure the other two were similar. Aizawa just sighed and motioned for the boy to follow him. Todoroki got up, and the two walked to the kitchen, where Aizawa handed him a piece of toast and plate of food. "The others are in the dining room. Enter at your own pace." Todoroki nodded and watched as Aizawa headed upstairs. A minute later, he dragged a tired Shinso down the stairs. Aizawa repeated what he had told Todoroki, then headed back upstairs for Izuku. "Did you sleep?" Todoroki asked, though he knew the answer. 3 hours. "More than I usually get," Shinso responded. He decided not to mention it was because he had hit his head on the floorboard hard enough to temporarily knock him out. "Fair." There was a moment of silence and listening to the others' kids laughing and joking from the other room before Shinso spoke up again. "Do you think he's gone yet?" Todoroki thought for a minute. "I didn't have a window or balcony." "Did you?" "I did." They looked at each other. "It's what he wanted anyways," Todoroki stated, "but I wouldn't be complaining if he was still alive." "Who the hell are you two?" A new voice came from the door, and Todoroki and Shinso whipped towards the voice. Their voice caught. "You're talking about that green-haired boy, aren't you?" The new voice accused. "Is he okay?" Shinso instantly asked. "Oh. He tried to jump off his balcony last night." Todoroki nodded thoughtfully. "But he failed. He's going to be mad again." "You fuckers knew he'd do that?" The boy screamed. "Well, we figured he might try it," Shinso explained. "He tried it last night too." The boy tried to push the purple-haired kid against the counter, but Shinso easily ducked under his arms and pinned him to the ground. Instead, "Hey, what's going on in here?" a new voice asked, before breaking out into a yell of shock. "Katsuki, round face, go back to the room." "I'm fucking fine." "These are the new kids," Katsuki responded, pushing Shinso off of him. "But, you were just..." Uraraka was confused. "Yeah, I'm fine," Katsuki brushed it off. "They're going into the dining room in a minute." Uraraka nodded and reluctantly left the room, and the dining room went silent after a couple minutes. Great, muttered Shinso. Guess we need to go a little early, Todoroki added. Katsuki nodded. Come on. We've been waiting all day. Following Katsuki's lead, Todoroki and Shinso followed him to the room, where a large group of kids turned to stare at them. Katsuki easily sat down in his earlier seat, and Shinso and Todoroki stood awkwardly. Where the hell did Aizawa go? You can sit, a kid with glasses spoke up. I'm Ida. Please, help yourselves to any food. Katsuki could tell it bothered him to do that. He wasn't used to talking to strangers so easily, but if Ida was making an effort for the new kids, so could everyone else. Todoroki sat next to a black-haired girl who introduced herself slowly as Momo. Shinso sat next to a kid with a black mark in his hair who introduced himself as Denki Kaminari. One by one, everyone said their names, however quietly or reluctantly, they did it. There was an awkward silence for a while before Tsuyu spoke up. Wasn't there 3 of you? Aizawa hasn't exactly brought him down yet, Shinso muttered, somewhat worried for Izuku. Don't try to talk to him. He doesn't speak, Todoroki added. He's mute. Several people cried out in shock. No, he just doesn't talk. Shinso could tell people wanted to ask why, but were holding themselves back. We don't know why, he answered for them, we just met him yesterday. In the cage fight, Todoroki mumbled. Everything once again went silent, this time, it being Aizawa entering the room to break it. Behind him, barely stumbling with his crutches, was a small green-haired boy. Sorry it took so long. He didn't want to use the crutches. Aizawa shot Izuku a look he didn't respond to. This is Izuku. Izuku looked up at his name and shook his head, but didn't respond or sign anything. Once again, everyone quickly introduced themselves, but Izuku didn't respond, instead just sitting on the floor with his plate of food, not bothering to touch it. Shinso sighed heavily as he stood up. Come on, you have to eat. With the help of Todoroki, the two began to hand-feed Izuku, who reluctantly ate it bit by bit. Katsuki decided this could be interesting. We're playing video games in the main room. Want to join? Kirishima asked the 3 new boys. Lunch had ended a while ago, and they had the day off to get to know each other. Shinso looked at him. What now? A video game? Kirishima didn't understand what Shinso was asking. What's that? Todoroki asked. Kirishima stared at them like they had grown 2 heads. Mina. Denki. He called, and the 2 kids came right up to them. What? Hey. Kirishima paused to make it sound dramatic. Don't know what video games are. Mina and Denki turned to them. Todoroki and Shinso just stared. Izuku didn't care, and was same as normal with his dead look. You know, games that you play on a TV? Denki tried to explain. Okay, how do you play said games on a TV? Todoroki asked. He and Shinso looked at each other amused. They didn't believe them. Come see, Mina said, pulling them playfully into the living room. Izuku followed mindlessly, slowly behind. Pulling everyone into the living room, Mina spent the next hour explaining video games, and showing them how it worked. They got some looks from the other kids, but no one interrupted. Even Izuku was paying slight attention to it. So, do you get it now? Mina asked, as they started their 100th game of Mario Karts. Kinda. Shinso breathed, totally entranced with the entire idea. Todoroki didn't respond, full focus on the game. Izuku gave a slight nod, which caused Mina to screech in excitement, and get a pillow thrown at her by Siro, who was trying to read on the couch. Hey, I'd like to check the news for a minute, Momo asked, coming into the room. Do you guys mind? I can wait if you want. Nah. We're at a good stopping point anyways, Shinso sighed, putting down the controller. Todoroki, Mina, Denki, and Kirishima copied his movements. What are you looking for on the news? Todoroki asked, and he and Shinso plopped themselves onto the couch. Momo went slightly pale and didn't respond, and Mina gave her a reassuring hug and smile. Izuku turned his attention to her now. He recognized her. Izuku briefly wondered if she would remember who he was, maybe even Arie. Izuku shut down those thoughts before they went any further. A while ago, over 2 years ago now, I was kidnapped. Momo gulped, taking a steadying breath before continuing. You see, my parents were very wealthy. You don't have to tell us if you don't want to, Shinso quickly cut in. No, it's fine. Momo shot down the idea. If Ida was making an effort for them, like at the table earlier, she could too. I was kidnapped for ransom by a gang. Both Izuku and Todoroki tensed up at this, even though Izuku already knew what had happened. They were awful and very forceful. It wasn't just me. I was brought to a hideout only a couple hours away from here. Momo was looking pale. It was worse there. I was living with the third in command and a woman. At night, other gang members would come to rest and recover, and it was... She trailed off shivering. Momo. Mina was ready to cut in, but Momo stopped her with a firm, shaking hand. Eventually, it came in on the news that my parents were going to refuse to pay for my ransom. The gang members were furious, and decided to sell me into prostitution to make their own money off of me. Momo's eyes were cloudy, and she was shaking. Before I tell you what happened next, let me go back to the whole "I wasn't there alone's" thing. Izuku bolted up, catching everyone's attention, but he didn't care. He was fully focused on Momo. Izuku remembered the day clearly, but had never gotten Arie's side of it, as she had refused to talk to him about it ever again. Momo was surprised at how it had caught Izuku's attention, but decided it meant she had to continue. At the base, there was a boy my age and a little girl. I saw the little girl only twice. The first time, she had heard my screams and peeked her head out of an upstairs room to check it out. The boy was out of the house, and the third in command saw her. Izuku went completely pale, but no one noticed. All eyes were on Momo, even those who had heard her story. He yelled at her to get downstairs and make them some food. The girl started crying and quickly shut the door, locking it. The man yelled at her until she finally unlocked the door, saying how he would take it out on something like Mito what's it if she didn't come do what she was told. The girl immediately did, coming downstairs and making them their food. Todoroki and Shinso had heard something like that name before. But where? They couldn't quite put their fingers on it, and both passed it off as a figure of their imagination. When she was giving them their food, the little girl kept her eyes on me. I tried to smile for her, but it's hard when your mouth's duct-taped. Momo gave a humorless laugh. Shinso shivered in understanding. The third in command guy kicked her, causing her to fall over. I couldn't do anything. But that boy came back. He always had a hoodie on, so I never saw his face, but he got mad and started yelling at the third in command. He took the girl back to the room and came back downstairs. A while later, the boy was ordered to watch me while they went out to do a job for the night. Izuku was going through the night in his head. The resulted punishment from that had made him unable to walk for months. He still had the scars from it. When everyone was gone, the little girl came back downstairs, and the two just looked at me. It was the little girl who spoke first. "Please?" she asked. "She hasn't done anything. Save her." The boy was watching me. He carefully removed the duct tape from my mouth, but I didn't say anything. "Would it be worth it?" he asked me. "If I save you, I'll be punished badly and my sister won't eat for a while. Would it be worth it to save you?" I was horrified at the idea. 2 people or 1? The answer was obvious. So I told him no. I told him I'd be okay, and to protect himself and his sister. To save themselves? Izuku shivered at how determined she sounded. He didn't regret what he'd done for a single second, but this just made him feel even better about it. Momo continued, though she was crying now. He said that answered his question and untied me. The boy picked up the little girl and kissed her, saying that if I didn't want to make his punishment worse, I should leave now. He led me to the door and gave me directions, telling me to be careful. That boy saved my life. Izuku hiccuped and bit his lip, trying not to cry. Arie has been so happy with him that day, she agreed it was worth the consequences. And I tried to tell people about him. I went to the police and they laughed at me. No one ever believed me. My life actually went back to normal for a while, but then... Now Momo trailed off, refusing to say more. Mina broke in now. "Do you guys know what this place is? The adults tend not to tell you until you're already here." Shinso, Izuku and Todoroki weren't stupid. They knew this was some sort of mental place. Mental hospital? Shinso guessed. Rehabilitation center, Mina muttered. No one's left or come in for 2 years now except for you three. That's interesting, you know? You're going to hear a lot of things here that you might not want to, but we are family. So don't feel pressured to share, and don't pressure others to share. Todoroki and Shinso nodded. Got it. Momo cleared her throat. So I turn on the news to check for that gang. What's the name of it? Todoroki asked. Holding his breath. Momo shrugged. Don't know. With one last hiccup, she flipped on the news channel. Everyone watched for a while, and some others came and left. Katsuki was pacing his room with Kirishima, going through every box of stuff he had recovered from his house after the fire. Shiro had come up and helped for a while too, with nothing found. Katsuki screamed in frustration. Didn't Mina tell you not to force your memory? Kirishima sighed. Why is it so important you know now anyways? You were fine before. Shut it, shitty hair. Katsuki growled. It's that new kid. Izuku. Kirishima checked. Yeah. Just something about him. Kirishima grinned, before quickly covering his mouth. It was so easy to forget about his problems around Katsuki. Alright, let's go ask Aizawa about visiting the storage units. Katsuki froze and went pale. He had been avoiding that place for a while now. It held too much stuff. He hadn't gone through it since the fire. You want to find out, right? Kirishima pushed, and when Katsuki nodded, Kirishima smiled without showing teeth. Then let's go. Momo had ended up turning off the news with nothing new. She wasn't expecting anything, but was still disappointed. She watched as Katsuki and Kirishima went up to Aizawa, and started to talk, gesturing wildly with their hands, and Aizawa sighed, but nodded. Then added something that made Katsuki curse loudly, and get yelled at by Ida. Momo wondered what it was. Izuku was still sitting on the couch, watching the others play their video games. A loud yell from Mike was heard throughout the building from speakers. Field trip. Everyone meet outside in front of the buses. Izuku heard some running and door slams, but didn't bother move. They'd probably leave him anyways. Izuku wondered how long it would take before people stopped noticing him completely. At what point would he be able to die without causing a commotion? A hand on his shoulder caused Izuku to jump, then instincts kicked in, and he grabbed the hand, flipping the person over so they crashed into the ground hard. Uraraka groaned, sitting up. Izuku felt a flash of guilt, but didn't do anything. Sorry, Uraraka laughed. Guess I shouldn't have scared you like that, didn't mean to. Izuku didn't move. Come on, she said, giving the boys slight nudges. We're leaving. Izuku followed behind Uraraka, leaving his crutches. He didn't need them anyways. Uraraka noticed, but didn't say anything, figuring he was probably fine if he was leaving them. You're late, Aizawa sighed when the two finally got on the bus. Izuku sat in front of Katsuki, next to Shinso. A familiar face. He wondered what he would be doing right now if Arie was alive. Izuku! A voice snapped, and a hand grabbed his shoulder, once again causing Izuku to flip the person over, this time it being Katsuki into Shinso. Both boys groaned, and everyone else stared. Izuku still didn't make a move to apologize. You can get your cast off tomorrow. It wasn't that bad a break, Aizawa sighed, tired of this problem child. With a jolt, the bus started, and not another word was said of the incident after Katsuki spent another 5 minutes cussing. When the bus pulled up to the place, it was a big building full of storage units. Mr. Aizawa, why are we here? Jair asked. Katsuki has something he needs, then we're going to the hospital to finish up Izuku's scratches, and then we're going out for lunch. Everyone nodded, cool with that answer. They watched as Katsuki and Kirishima ran inside, followed by Mike. Aizawa leaned back and closed his eyes, deciding to take a nap. Hey Izuku, why don't you communicate with anyone? Tsuyu asked. Everyone looked at her, and she shrugged. Worth a shot. Izuku didn't care. They could ask as many questions as they wanted, it wouldn't change anything. But while the teacher was asleep and Katsuki wasn't here to stop him, could he try again? Izuku decided it was worth a shot, so slowly picking up his hands he signed. Commit. Todoroki and Shinso blinked in surprise. They had both been able to read it, and were honestly surprised he was still trying. Momo and Uraraka could also understand it, and both were really hoping they had read it wrong. Was that sign? Mina asked, what did he say? Well, Shinso didn't really want to repeat that, so Izuku repeated the sign one more time. Kill me. Kill me, Uraraka spoke, dread sinking into her stomach. Todoroki and Shinso nodded in confirmation. Absolutely not. Ida snapped, why would you even say sign that? Izuku mentally sighed. It was a long shot, so he wasn't surprised it hadn't worked. Still, Izuku didn't want to hear any more questions. He was so sick of them. He just wanted to be with Arie. Was it really that hard? As if sensing they wouldn't get a response, the talking resumed to normal, unimportant subjects, like sports and favorite colors. It was interrupted by a furious yell from Katsuki, who was storming back towards the bus, followed by a quiet Kirishima and Mike a couple ways behind them. Izuku! Katsuki yelled, get out here now. When Katsuki, Kirishima and Mike had first entered the storage unit, there were a lot of boxes, so they had figured it was best to split up. Even Mike was helping. They had decided to just focus now on picture books, or journals that Katsuki might have had when he was younger. Looking through all the stuff, Katsuki felt no connection to it, no feelings of recognition ignited either. An hour had nearly passed, and they were ready to give up, when a particular picture sticking out of a box caught Katsuki's attention. Grabbing the picture, Katsuki studied it for a minute. It was of two little kids, 5 or 6. One was him, and the other had green hair, like Izuku's. Katsuki flipped it over, where something had been written. Izuku Midoriya and Katsuki Bakugo. Ages 5, September 20th. Day trip to the zoo. Kirishima. Katsuki yelled, get over here. Kirishima rushed over, and saw the picture. That's Izuku. Katsuki rolled his eyes. Noda. So come on, help me dig out this box. With the two of them filled with excitement, the box was quickly removed, and then ripped open. Inside, the box was filled with posters. Specifically, missing posters. All of them from a young green-haired boy. All labeled Izuku Midoriya. Upon closer inspection, there was some for all of the Midoriyas. Flipping through the papers, Kirishima and Katsuki noticed that the ones who had made the posters were actually Bakugos. Katsuki's parents. What the fuck? Katsuki whispered. When had this happened? Kirishima spotted another picture in the box of posters and quickly grabbed it. This time, it was of 7 people. There was a small, white-haired baby that Izuku was holding tightly, Katsuki besides them. Glaring at Izuku's parents, Katsuki's own parents were in the picture too. Kirishima showed it to Katsuki, who flipped it over. More words. The day before the disappearance. Junaith. Come back safely. Katsuki and Kirishima looked at each other, before flipping the box upside, pouring out all of the contents. Throwing the posters aside, a small journal could be seen. The two boys couldn't believe their luck. Grabbing the journal, Katsuki was upset to realize it had been badly damaged and mostly unreadable, but a page at the end could be made out. Junif. Deku stared. He won't tell me why, but it his mom and da. I know it. His small sister stopped coming whenever we play, and Deka's been having to leave soon now. I will help whatever it is. Katsuki, I tried sorry. Katsuki and Kirishima looked at each other, before snatching up the 2 pictures and journals, and racing to the bus, barely hearing Mike as he asked where they were going. Izuku! Katsuki yelled, get out here now. Katsuki stormed onto the bus, and grabbed Izuku's shirt, shoving him against the side of the seat. Katsuki! Calm down. Kirishima yipped. Katsuki ignored them. Shut the fuck up. All of you. Katsuki guessed everyone heard the urgency in his voice, because they thankfully did. Izuku stared at Katsuki with dead eyes, like he didn't care what happened next. Where the hell have you been, Deku? Katsuki ended up whispering, as he found his composure breaking more and more. That name made Izuku look up, and Shinso and Todoroki both looked at each other. Wasn't that the name Izuku had asked them to call him at the cage? How did Katsuki know it? Katsuki let Deku fall to the floor, and threw down the 2 pictures and journal next to him. Aizawa was awake now, and watching the 2 boys carefully with Mike, making sure nothing got out of hand. As if a switch flipped in Katsuki's head, he turned and abruptly took a seat, refusing to look at anyone. Kirishima slid in next to him. Deku was about to sit back down when the pictures caught his attention. It was Katsuki? He quickly grabbed the pictures and notebook and sat back in his seat next to Shinso. Was looking at the photos curiously. Izuku couldn't think right. The photos were of him and Katsuki and his whole family in another. Had he known Katsuki when he was younger? He was familiar, but the name didn't sound right. Did Izuku call him Katsuki? It was something like Katchin. Or Kakin. Kakin, Izuku signed with his hands. The name felt right. Kakin? Shinso repeated out loud as the bus started with a jump. Katsuki looked up. What the fuck did you just say? Shinso shrugged. Izuku signed that. Kakin. Katsuki nodded, as if it meant something, and turned towards the window. Izuku was stuck staring at the pages of the notebook in the meantime. He didn't understand. What did this mean? Did it change anything? Izuku didn't think so. He wondered if he told Kakin how he would react though. When they pulled up to the hospital, only Aizawa and Izuku went in. It was quick and took a minute, just including removing some stitches and the bandages on his head, putting his arm in a weird machine that healed it faster so he could take off his cast early, and removing the bandages on his foot. It was in and out, but Izuku could have sworn he had seen someone staring at them. It made him uncomfortable and gave him a bad feeling. Izuku was grateful when they were finally able to leave the hospital and get back on the bus, and for once, he didn't need to be nudged to move on his own. When they pulled up to the lunch place and everyone piled into the restaurant, Izuku still had a bad feeling. He was being watched. Izuku hadn't been sure, but now he was. Someone was following him. Izuku wondered if he should tell someone. Would it matter? What if he was being paranoid? What if they wanted to kill him? Izuku didn't know. It didn't matter though, because Aizawa caught the feeling too. We're being watched, he whispered to Mike. Mike instantly paled. Should we go back? No. It'll only bring more attention to us. Just keep an eye out and call Tashinori to give us backup, Aizawa decided. Mike nodded and pulled out his phone, dialing. As the kids all laughed and ordered, Izuku felt someone stare on him. After thinking it through a little more, he decided to tell Aizawa. Worst case he didn't believe him. Actually no, worst case someone here would die that wasn't Izuku. Izuku signed quickly, hoping to get it over with. We're being watched. No one had seen, so he rapped on the table 3 times to get people's attention, and signed it again. We're being watched. It worked. This time Todoroki and Mina had noticed him. Todoroki tried to quietly get everyone's attention. Hey, can I say something? No one noticed, so Mina took charge. Everyone shut up. Izuku has a message. That worked. Everyone went quiet, and even Aizawa and Mike were listening. Izuku says we're being watched, Mina explained. Aizawa and Mike paled some more. Izuku had noticed it too. Everyone turned towards Mike and Aizawa, and they simply shook their heads. Play it off, Aizawa ordered, and the others could tell he was worried. So they did. They went back to talking about boats and stuff, and tried not to look around constantly. Nothing happened again until they were about to leave, when 2 gunshots filled the air, silencing the entire restaurant. No one move. A voice shouted that Izuku recognized. 5 figures stepped in front of the cashier, all people Izuku knew too well. The only difference, before they had leverage over him. Now, Izuku just wanted to die. I'm Shigaraki Tamura. A blue-haired figure snarled, scratching furiously at his neck. Leader of the league. No one dared move. Even Izuku couldn't get himself to. Next to Shigaraki was Hisashi, twice, Dabi and Toga. Shigaraki was expecting a fight, Izuku decided. He had his best fighters. Third in command, Izuku heard Momo whisper in fear. We're here for the boy, twice yelled, pointing to the group of kids. Everyone looked to where he was pointing. Izuku. What do you want with Izuku? Aizawa called. He doesn't even talk. Hisashi stepped forward. Yes he does. He's just being a bit dramatic right now. He'll get over it eventually. Hisashi, back off, Shigaraki warned. You lost him in the first place. Come on back Aizu. We miss you. Toga called, grinning in glee. Don't call me that, Izuku snapped viciously, and everyone stared at him. Toga took a step back at the rage in his eyes. Izuku didn't even care he had spoken. No one was allowed to call him Aizu but one person, and that person was dead. Izuku was going to kill her. Kill everyone that ruined Arie's life. Stay in your place, Izuku, Shigaraki called up. You have nothing against me anymore. Izuku yelled. You killed her. I don't care anymore. I don't care. Izuku started to cry, eyes burning with hatred. You took everything. You can have another. Again. Isashi hissed, irritated. Izuku went silent. They were cold-blooded murderers. They would never understand anyways. Izuku had nothing to say to them. Instead, as Shigaraki ordered him to come down and no one would get hurt, Izuku curled into a ball, covering his ears, biting his tongue, closing his eyes, smelling into his shirt. Covering each of his senses. Izuku didn't care what happened to him. The kids were watching the exchange in fear. What would happen to Izuku? Who was Izuku? The boy had curled into a ball now, ignoring everything else. After his explosion, he seemed to have lost even more willpower and spirit, if that was even possible. Luckily for them, some police had been right outside, which the kids knew couldn't be a coincidence. Aizawa and Mike had called for even more backup right after Izuku's declaration earlier. Now, they were surrounding the gang members, though Aizawa doubted they would catch them. They weren't the top gang in the world for nothing. Aizawa was right. 20 minutes of yelling, and 2 smoke bombs, confusion-filled moments later, and they were gone. Aizawa stood over Izuku, refusing to let anyone have a good shot at grabbing him. It had worked, but the boy looked worse off than before, if that was even possible. Aizawa was starting to really worry about what this boy had gone through, and if he could ever really heal from it. Let's go, Mike muttered to Aizawa as he rounded up the kids back onto the bus. Aizawa tapped Izuku gently, but when the boy made no effort to move, he leaned forward and picked Izuku up, carrying him onto the bus. No one said anything as the bus pulled out. Behind the bus were 2 police cars, making sure they were safely escorted back to the building, and Aizawa had made sure patrols would be going up and down their street all night. Aizawa was still holding Izuku, who felt way lighter than he should have. He had questions but knew it wasn't the time to ask. Aizawa had a feeling Katsuki knew something too. Izuku was having a silent meltdown. He had lost everything. Even his freedom was snatched once again, but this time with no Arie. Izuku wanted to scream, wanted to fight, wanted to die. Izuku wanted to feel pain, make it physical, something to control. It was too hot, but Izuku didn't dare take off his shirt. When the bus finally arrived back at the building, Deku pushed himself out of Aizawa's arms, and to everyone's surprise, stumbled into the building. Izuku had been planning to go to his room, but instead stopped, and collapsed onto the couch, not bothering. He needed to think. Izuku needed sleep, he needed the break. The darkness. Katsuki walked over to Izuku, and sat next to him, without saying a word. Izuku glanced up at him, then eyes scrunched up, grabbed onto his shirt, throwing himself onto Kaken, and started to cry. Izuku had to tell him. He had to tell someone. Izuku opened his mouth, but his voice caught, and Izuku found he could no longer talk. As if sensing it, Katsuki put a hand on Izuku's back, letting him sob into him. Eventually, with some rocking, Izuku was getting drowsy, and fell fast asleep. As carefully as he could without waking Izuku, Katsuki slipped out from under him, and made his way to the kitchen, where hot chocolate was being passed out. Kirishima grinned at him, and Denki and Shinso snickered. Shut the hell up. Not a word of this, Katsuki growled. The mood dropped once again. Mr. Aizawa, I have reasons to believe Izuku was the one who rescued me that night, Momo spoke up, startling everyone. Mina looked appalled. Wait, this Izuku? Have you met him? He hasn't even spoken to us. Momo nodded. But the little girl. I think it has to do with her, she explained. Todoroki looked thoughtful. He didn't have a little girl with him at the cage fight, he muttered. Everyone swiveled to him. What cage fight? Katsuki demanded. Todoroki looked surprised. The one Izuku, Shinso and I met at? Like, watching, right? Denki quietly asked. No, fighting, Todoroki said, confused. So, you, Shinso, and Izuku were fighting each other. In a cage match, too. Yeah, that's how we met, Shinso confirmed. Everyone looked at them like they had grown two heads. Shinso just shrugged. That's not the problem here. Katsuki snapped, grabbing the attention. Where the hell did Deku's sister go? Wait, how do you know that little girl's Izuku's sister? Momo challenged. Because I fucking knew Deku from before. Katsuki snapped back. The temperatures seemed to drop. How's that possible? Shiro muttered, and Aizawa muttered a curse. Of course Aizawa's top two problem children had history. What else? What's the little girl's name? Jair asked. I don't fully remember. I think it was something like Arie or Arie, Katsuki said thoughtfully. He pursed his lips tightly and changed his mind. No, it was definitely Arie. Aizawa nodded, taking notes. So Izuku has a sister named Arie. Now the question is, where the hell is she? I think she's dead, Tsuyu spoke. What? Katsuki snapped. Why the hell would you think that? You don't know Deku, if that happened, Dash? Tsuyu flinched back. He would break, Shinso finished thoughtfully, interrupting Katsuki's rant. Simultaneously, everyone turned to the sleeping boy on the couch. If that's not broke, I don't know what is, Mina hissed. That's bullshit. Arie can't be dead. Deku would have stopped it, or killed himself first. You don't understand. Katsuki was desperately trying to make this make sense. But it didn't. Deku would have fought anyone to get in his way if it came down to Arie. Sure, it's been over 5 years since they've last seen each other, but Katsuki knew Deku. Katsuki? Kirishima snapped, finally getting his attention. I'm sorry, Katsuki. She's dead, Aizawa murmured as the pieces all came together. No. Katsuki spat, voice cracking. That's the video Izuku watched, Shinso muttered in realization. They must have made him watch his own sister's death. That was his punishment for disobeying, Todoroki added solemnly. And it broke him. That's why he refuses to talk now, Uraraka whispered. Even if she didn't know him before, she had been told enough to know this was new. Is this why Izuku doesn't smile? Mina wondered. No, I think that's an older thing, Shinso guessed. Why do you think that? Jair asked. Shinso shrugged. You don't always control when you smile, sometimes you can't help it, and yet Izuku hadn't done it once. Not even before he saw the video. It was a cage fight, Todoroki pointed out. Well, just in case we are wrong, don't go telling any of this to Midoriya, Aizawa interrupted, and me and Mike will need to up security a little, now that we know he's still being targeted. Everyone murmured in agreement. And in the meantime? Kirishima asked. In the meantime, focus on healing, Mike responded. Yeah. That's all we ever do, Katsuki muttered sourly. Izuku awoke in a cold sweat, screaming. Mike and Aizawa were over him, shaking the scared boy. It's okay, everything's all right. You're safe now, Mike tried to soothe. Izuku started crying, sobbing into his chest. Even in his dreams he relived Arie's death. Izuku just couldn't catch a break from it. Aizawa sighed and glanced at the clock. 5:36. It was too late to go back to sleep and get any good rest, so Aizawa made some hot chocolate and sat in the living room with Izuku, watching a Disney movie, hoping that would soothe the boy's mind. It worked, and soon Izuku has stopped crying and was staring intently at the screen. Aizawa felt immensely relieved he had found a good distraction, and Mike had started on breakfast for those who were waking up. Hey, how long has the shitty nerd been up? Katsuki asked, joining Mina and Kirishima on the couch. 5:30, Aizawa sighed. I think he had a nightmare. Izuku gave a small nod, and hugged himself tightly, refusing to look at anyone, and instead staring intensely at the screen. Morning Izuku, Shinso sighed, joining them. The bags under his eyes were dark as ever, and Aizawa doubted he had slept. Shinso, we need to find something for your insomnia. Shinso shrugged. Maybe. Is there a school system or something? Todoroki asked, joining the others in the room. Or are we just going to go on field trips all day and stuff? We get to go to school. We're in a special class, Class 1A at a school. It's looked down upon by others, but we're doing the same classes as them, Mina explained as more people came into the living room. So why haven't we gone yet? Shinso asked. The weekend? School starts again tomorrow, Shiro said. What's so different about the weekend that you don't have to work? Todoroki muttered. Aizawa heard him, but didn't say anything, noting it for later. Anyways, Shinso, Todoroki, I've been meaning to ask you some questions about your situation, Aizawa cut in. No thanks, Todoroki declined. Hard pass, Shinso muttered at the same time. Aizawa stared at the two. Let me rephrase that, I'm going to be asking you questions about your situation. Who wants to go first? I'm going to go get breakfast, Todoroki said, standing up and leaving the room. I really like the movie? Shinso glanced at it. Aizawa rolled his eyes. Let's go. You're first. Muttering a curse, Shinso followed Aizawa into his room, where the questioning began. Instead of watching the movie, Katsuki kept his eyes on Izuku, watching how they stared plainly into the TV. Katsuki figures he wasn't actually watching anything, just in his own head. Scooting next to Izuku, Katsuki tapped lightly on his shoulder, making the boy jump, and almost flip Katsuki, stopping himself just barely. You're getting better about that, Katsuki observed, giving Izuku a grin. Izuku just stared in response. Do you remember me? 'Cause I remember you. And I'm not the only one, Katsuki continued. Momo remembers you too. She'd like to thank you later, but she's still asleep. How'd you like that? Izuku didn't move, and for a minute, Katsuki thought the boy had just shut him out completely, but to Katsuki's pleasure, Izuku tapped Katsuki's shoulder. Just once, but it was enough. Standing up, Katsuki smirked at Izuku. I'll be back in a bit. Don't get into trouble without me. Without another word, Katsuki turned and ran into the kitchen, where Mike, Kaminari, Shiro and Todoroki were eating. I got him to communicate. Katsuki smirked, grinning at the others. Who? Kaminari asked, and Katsuki smacked him gently. Izuku. Mike quickly stood, and Todoroki stared at him. How? When we were younger we had a code for when we were bored. 1 tap meant yes, 2 taps meant no. I was talking to Deku earlier, and he tapped my shoulder once. Katsuki explained, unable to wipe off his triumphant smirk. Mike looked thoughtful. Are you sure it was purposeful? Katsuki rolled his eyes. Yes. What did you ask him? Kaminari mumbled, mouth stuffed with bread. Chew with your mouth closed, idiot, Shiro sighed. Just about Momo and remembering him. Hope you didn't scare him, Todoroki wondered. Course I didn't. I know how to be calm, Katsuki retorted. No you don't, Kaminari and Shiro instantly responded. Katsuki rolled his eyes, but couldn't wipe off his grin. Fuck off, Shinso yelled, and a door slammed, making everyone flinch. Shinso stormed into the kitchen and out the door, ignoring everyone's shocked stares. Aizawa followed behind, collapsing into a chair in the kitchen with a heavy sigh. Everything okay, Mr. Aizawa? Kaminari asked. Kids, Aizawa muttered, refusing to elaborate. I'm going to go bring him breakfast, Kaminari announced as everyone looked silently after where Shinso had disappeared, grabbing a plate of food. You still don't know him, Shiro protested. Let him be. Kaminari only smiled as he followed where Shinso has disappeared. Idiot, Katsuki muttered. I'll kill eyebags if he hurts Sparky. We love you too, Shiro grinned. Hey, it's me, Kaminari said, walking carefully up to Shinso. Shinso was sitting in the garden, watching the sky. What do you want? I brought you food. Shinso didn't even look up. Go away. Kaminari laughed, sitting next to Shinso. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. Or tell me anything. But I'll listen if you do. Oh, you'll just turn around and tell everyone the second I do. I know how you people work. Once you get what you need, you send us off all over again. Shinso glared angrily at the sky, even as tears pricked his vision. Kaminari hummed. I won't. You're right. Why should I trust you? Ask me anything. That caught Shinso off guard. Why would I want to ask you anything? I don't care about you. So there's nothing you want to know? I can't promise to tell you, depending on what it is, but ask away. I can't. Promise the answer you're looking for or to even correctly answer it, but just something you need to get off your chest. I'll answer. Kaminari laid down, watching the clouds roll by peacefully. Shinso hesitated. One question couldn't hurt, right? And wouldn't give much away they couldn't already figure out. Am I selfish? That doesn't give a lot of context, Kaminari noted. But from what I've seen so far, no. You didn't let me wait what you've seen so far that you can say that? Well, Kaminari thought a minute before responding. The people you came with. I haven't been around you long enough to know anything about you guys, or the information you have, or stuff you've done. So I base it off of the stuff you haven't done. Shinso looked at him silently. So far, you haven't given any important information on either of the kids you came here with. Even if you don't know much, you probably could infer enough from where you were previously when you met, and who you were with, to have enough information to make a deal with the teachers. What sort of deal would I even make? Shinso muttered. One to put things in your favor. Let you go. Figure out something you want. There are tons of possibilities, Kaminari explained. So, you're basing your answer on whether or not I'm selfish on what I haven't done? Shinso asked, incredulous. Yup. Kaminari exclaimed. You're a complete and utter idiot, Shinso decided, but he couldn't help the small smile that came to his face. Kaminari smiled even wider. It works. So sorry for interrupting before you could finish, Kaminari sheepishly apologized. What was the rest? Shinso went quiet. No pressure. Kaminari panicked, thinking he had said something wrong. You can leave it there if you want. What are you here for? Shinso quietly asked. If you don't mind me asking. Kaminari easily slid off his shirt, shaking off a scrappy but firm stomach, scars raking across his chest. A lot of people have scars, Shinso muttered. Kaminari nodded and turned around. A lot of people do have scars. Shinso couldn't keep his eyes from widening in surprise. Kaminari had a pale pattern striped across his back, leading all the way to his legs. I was struck by lighting, Kaminari explained, in a quiet voice that Shinso didn't think matched the boy. It was storming and the cable broke, so they sent me outside to fix it. I got hit with lightning on the roof, and my parents left me for dead. Shinso forced his eyes away from Kaminari's back. All scars have a story behind them. They do, Kaminari thoughtfully agreed. Shinso was surprised when Kaminari didn't even at least glance at the scars across his lips. I hope you don't expect me to just open up that easily, Shinso said, pursing his lips tightly. Nope. Kaminari went back to smiling and humming. I just figured I could tell you some of my story, let you have something to think about. They spent the rest of the morning watching the clouds in silence. Inside, everyone had woken, and were discussing plans to visit the school early to let Deku, Shinso and Todoroki look around before school started. Look, not everyone can go, Aizawa sighed. I'll be taking 6 people in all, so only 3 of you. I'll go, Katsuki instantly volunteered. Oh. You're going to stay here and relax, Aizawa ordered. You've been pushing yourself too far again. Katsuki muttered a curse, but sat back down. I'll go, Kirishima offered, nervously raising his hand. That will work, Aizawa agreed. I'll also have Kaminari go. I'm okay with going as well, Tsuyu muttered. Uraraka gave her an encouraging nudge. Great. That's our plan then. Go ahead and get ready, we'll have lunch while we're out too. Is that safe with people trying to get Deku? Katsuki challenged. Aizawa rolled his eyes. We'll eat at the school. Calm down, Katsuki. Katsuki muttered a curse, but backed off, slouching in his chair. I'll go let Denki and Shinso know, Shiro offered. I'll help Deku get ready, Tsuyu croaked. If that's okay, of course. Aizawa nodded. 10 minutes. I'll be waiting in the van. When they pulled up to the school, Todoroki and Shinso silently stared. Tsuyu helped Deku out of the car, and Kaminari and Kirishima climbed out after them. Go ahead and show them around. I need to go talk with Nizu and Midnight. Kaminari reacted first as their teacher walked off. Come on. There's a ton of cool things inside, and a huge gym room, and the classrooms are really nice too. Todoroki helped lead Deku inside, Tsuyu following right behind. Kirishima and Kaminari stared the tour, excitedly pointing out everything around them and talking about what they were for. Todoroki and Shinso were amused to say the least. "Tsuyu, is something wrong?" Todoroki asked, not kindly but not hostile either. "It's probably fine. And you can call me Azui. It's probably fine. That doesn't mean anything. What are you looking for?" Shinso narrowed his eyes at them. "Don't keep stuff from us. It won't go over well." Tsuyu looked at the ground. "Lay off her, man," Kirishima broke in. "She's just keeping a lookout for some classmates." Shinso turned away, pressing a finger to his lips, tracing the scars. Deku gently put a hand on his shoulder, causing Shinso to jump, but didn't say anything or even look up, instead watching the floor with tired eyes. They continued the tour in silence, Kaminari leading it alone this time. When they reached the hallways to Class 1B, a couple kids were in the hallway, causing the group to freeze. "We should go," Kaminari muttered. "Agreed," Kirishima whispered back. They all turned around to go, but the kids had already caught sight of them. "Hey, freaks, where you running off to? Where's your little doggy? Not here to protect you this time, is he?" A boy laughed. Kirishima grit his teeth tightly. "Cut it out, man, leave Bakugo alone." "Who are you?" Todoroki asked, glaring at the boy. "That's Momo," Kaminari sighed. "We should go." "Going so soon?" Momo mocked as they turned to leave again. "Guess it makes sense since you don't have your leader here with you." The kids around Momo laughed. "And it looks like there are newbies. We should show them who's in charge around here," one of Momo's friends snarled. Shinso paled, and Todoroki put up his fists. Tsuyu started to cry, and Kaminari hugged her tightly. "That's enough. Screw off. Why should we? Little froggy going to stop us? You and the rock over there can't do a thing." The kids and Momo stepped towards them threateningly, causing Todoroki and Shinso to tense even more, and the others to back up. Only Izuku didn't move. "Hey, what's wrong with that one?" Momo asked, pointing at Izuku. "He's barely moved. Don't tell me he's scared already." "Leave Izuku alone," Shinso growled, glaring at them. "Not cool," Kirishima spat. "You're really pushing it. Leave him alone." Momo ignored them and stalked towards Izuku, pushing him against the wall. Todoroki and Shinso reacted immediately, only to be shoved back as well by his friends. "Hey, cut it out!" Kaminari yelled, fighting against the girl that held him to the wall. Tsuyu crouched into a ball as a boy looked above her, sobbing into her hands. "Try anything and Greenie takes the consequences," Momo threatened, and everyone froze. "Momo, you'll be expelled for this," Kirishima tried to reason. "This is so different from us, let him go now." Momo ignored Kirishima. "I wonder how long he'll go before he speaks?" Izuku didn't respond, not even flinching when Momo smacked him. "Stop it!" Todoroki roared, struggling against the two people holding him back. "Let me go now." "Maybe you should stop," one of his friends said nervously. "Something's wrong here." Momo ignored him, instead punching Izuku again, this time in the stomach. Izuku barely grunted. After a couple more failed attempts at a reaction, Momo shook his head. "He's really broken. What a shame, could have been so fun too. Let's see if the purple guy's the same." Shinso's eyes widened, but before anyone could react, Momo was on the ground, holding his nose and yelling in pain, as Izuku stood above him, fists still retracted from the punch. Blood was leaking onto the floor, and Momo's friends let out a string of cusses, stepping back from the scene and releasing the others. Todoroki instantly punched the guy who had been holding him, before kicking the other hard enough to make him drop. Without a word, Kirishima went over to Tsuyu and helped her up, pushing away the guy standing over her. He cradled her tightly while Momo's yells filled the corridor. Shinso and Kaminari had helped lead Izuku back downstairs after that, with Tsuyu leaning on Kirishima and Todoroki on guard for another attack. Not a word had been said since the incident, and Aizawa was looking for them for lunch. "Did something happen?" Aizawa asked, looking them over as they headed to the cafeteria. "It's fine," Todoroki said when the others remained quiet. Aizawa didn't push. They had the cafeteria to themselves, but still no one was comfortable. There was some small talk between them, and Aizawa looked over some papers while they ate. When Izuku slipped up and out of his seat, no one noticed. Izuku left the cafeteria, heading back upstairs to the corridors where Momo and his friends had attacked them. He was quiet, determined. Izuku didn't care about any consequences. He wasn't letting this go. It took some looking and a little bit of wandering before he came across the room where they were. Momo was holding an ice pack to his nose, and another kid was holding one to his lower chest. Izuku stepped into the room, making his presence clear and causing all the kids to look up at him. "Aren't you the mute? What do you want?" Momo spat. Izuku narrowed his eyes and lifted his hands. This is a one-time warning. You ever get anywhere near my classmates ever again, I will kill you and your friend Star. I don't know sign, Momo laughed. What a useless language for the disabled. Those who can't talk don't deserve to. The kids behind him started laughing too, jeering at Izuku. Izuku glared. I said, he viciously spat, causing everyone to go silent and stare in shock, that if you ever go near my associates ever again, I will beat you into the ground and kill you without a second thought. Izuku's voice was hoarse from not being used in a while, but he spoke clearly and loudly. There's no way a little actor like you could kill me, Momo chuckled. Do I need to prove a point to you again? Or better yet, maybe this time I really should go after that purple-haired freak and show him dash? In the next instant, Izuku had shoved Momo to the ground, punching him in the side of the face over and over. Bloom splattered to the floor while Momo screamed in pain, his friends all yelling and panicking. Izuku didn't stop until two hands pulled him off of Momo, the kid instantly scrambling off the floor and out the door. Blood was pouring down his face, and his eye was swollen shut, lip busted, nose bleeding. You freak! Momo shrieked. I'll get you for this. Izuku glared at him, and Momo went running, his friends right behind him. Finally, Izuku turned to the person who had pulled him off, only to let the glare fade away when he saw Kaminari. Hey dude, you good? Izuku numbly nodded. Do you need help? Kaminari motioned to the splattered blood on the floor. You also, got some on you? Izuku glanced at a window, looking at his reflection. Blood had gotten on him, little bits splattered on his face, and all over his shirt. But he shook his head. It was fine. She woke up coughing and spluttering on the river bank, half in the water, half out. Based on how hungry she was, Arie figured she had been there at least a day. She quickly pushed herself up, shutting her eyes tightly as dizziness overwhelmed her, then forced herself onto the solid ground, teeth chattering. Arie tried to stand up, only to collapse to the ground. It took 2 more tries before she was able to successfully stand, and another 3 to start walking. Her scar on the corner of her forehead was aching, Arie's stomach growled, and she hugged her arms tightly from the cold. Her hair stuck to the side of her head, and Arie's clothes were fully soaked from the water. But she was alive. Glancing around determined there was no real immediate danger, rather than the cold. It was one of the bad parts of town, that Izuku has taken her one of the few times she'd been allowed outside. Everything was really bright, but not many people were out. It hurt Arie's eyes. Izuku. Where was Izuku? Arie was positive he wouldn't be with their parents. She knew he only stayed around for her. But where did he have to go? Arie started making her way towards the road. Right now, she would focus on finding a place to stay. Then, she'd figure out how to find Izuku. Walking through all the stalls and beaten buildings, no one paid Arie any mind. It was easy for her to snag some clothes and a jacket from an abandoned clothesline, though they were a little big. Arie ended up abandoning her shoes, as they had been all but destroyed from the river. She also snatched a sandwich and water from a nearby couple who had left their food to make out. It didn't take long to reach a train, and really wasn't difficult for her to sneak in. Arie didn't smile though, and didn't drop her guard, always looking around and listening. She didn't have a plan for now, but that was okay. Izuku had told her that. Izuku said she didn't always need a plan. Arie's thoughts traveled back to Izuku. He must have seen her drop into the river, and think she was dead, or he would have found her by now. Arie knew that. So if he wasn't looking, how would she find him? Hey, where's your parents? A tall boy with blonde hair asked Arie, after a couple hours. She had noticed him get on, but he hadn't seemed suspicious, so she hadn't paid him any mind. Now Arie wished she had. "They're waiting for me." "So you're riding alone?" The boy continued. "That's really cool, but aren't you a little young? I'm not supposed to talk to strangers." Arie wondered if she would be able to hide if he decided to go after her. "My apologies." "Of course not. I'm Mirio," the boy laughed. Arie stared at the broad smile that Mirio had. Why was he smiling at a stranger? Arie hadn't even helped him? Arie tilted her head at him. "Do you want something?" "Course not. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "But you don't know me." Mirio's smile faded a moment. "Well, it's just decent kindness, I think. I want to help people one day. And you seemed worried about something. I wanted to make sure you were okay." Arie pursed her lips. "Okay." She didn't understand at all. When she found Izuku, Arie decided to ask him. Maybe he could explain this boy's weird reasoning and actions. Thankfully, Arie noticed Mirio going back to his phone and leaving Arie alone. She was about to take the moment of distraction to slip away, but instead got an idea. "Mirio? I'm looking for someone. How would I find him?" Mirio was silent for a minute. "I suppose you can go to the police and file a missing person report. Do you want help finding this person?" Arie quickly shook her head. "Thank you, that's all I wanted to know." Arie didn't know about the police, but she couldn't risk asking Mirio again, not with his suspicions raised now. The rest of the train ride, she stayed silent. When Mirio finally reached his stop, he kept an eye on the little girl. She got off on his stop, so it was easy to follow her. The little girl was definitely taking her time, being cautious of everyone and everything, which Mirio couldn't blame her for. She was alone after all. As he followed her outside, Mirio promised himself he would only make sure she had somewhere safe to go to, then he would go. But the longer he followed her, the more clear it got, no one was waiting for the little girl. Arie knew she was being followed. She knew it was Mirio, the boy from the train. Arie needed to lose him though, and quick. Taking back roads, going through parks, slipping through buildings, it took a while before Arie could finally lose him, and even still, Arie wasn't sure he wouldn't still go looking for her. She had to get away. It was starting to get dark, so Arie knew she had some time. Arie needed to find a solid place to hide, somewhere near other kids, where no one would be suspicious. Near a school would be perfect. Kaminari helped Izuku downstairs, the adrenaline finally starting to wear off. When Aizawa saw them, he only sighed tiredly before telling them to gather their stuff. They were leaving. Kaminari didn't tell anyone what had happened, nor did he tell anyone Izuku had talked, instead just silently offering his comfort as the others burned holes into their backs. When they got to the building, Aizawa pulled Kaminari and Izuku away from the others. "Izuku, why is there blood on you?" Izuku didn't respond, so Aizawa turned to Kaminari expectantly. "My dude, don't look at me." "Well, where did you find him then?" Aizawa sighed. "I don't know, he was heading back downstairs and I ran into him." Kaminari glanced at Izuku, who didn't respond. "Izuku? Can you tell us anything?" Aizawa wasn't surprised when he got no answer, just annoyed. "Fine. Go clean up or whatever, and stay out of trouble." Kaminari ended up dragging Izuku to the bathroom and helping him get the blood off his face. "I heard what you said earlier. Listen, I won't tell anyone, but if I learn sign, would you be willing to communicate with me? I could get the others to learn as well, you know?" Izuku looked at Kaminari, studying him to see if he was serious. Why? He found himself signing. Kaminari grinned, taking it as a yes. "Awesome. I'll go tell the others now." Before Izuku could react, he was already out the door, racing downstairs. Izuku looked into the mirror, studying his eyes. They looked tired and dull, uncaring. When had he come to this? Guys. Kaminari scrambled into the main room. "Sign lessons." "What?" Mike asked. "Slow down." Izuku said if we learned sign he would maybe start to open up to us, well kinda. Mike blinked at him. "Okay then, guess we're learning sign." "Wait, what?" Siro peeked up at Kaminari. "You don't know sign, did he talk to you?" "Well that's great news." Mina shrieked, interrupting his answer. "Let's do it." Kaminari sent Siro a sheepish glance as everyone started making plans and talking excitedly. Shiro never got the chance to ask more. Todoroki knocked on the bathroom door, causing Izuku to jump. Didn't mean to startle you. Izuku didn't respond. So what do you think of the school? So weird to me, I've never seen one before today. Todoroki wasn't expecting an answer, and honestly wasn't sure what he was rambling about, or even why he cared. Honestly, I'm not sure what to expect when it starts. This time, Izuku gave a meek nod in agreement, and Todoroki gave a half smile. This is so unusual. If you had told me when I was with my father that there were moving picture boxes that talked, and a place where kids went and got along for more than a day, I'd never have believed you. Todoroki was rewarded with another small nod, prompting him to continue. He sat down on the floor, and Izuku slid down next to him, laying his head on his shoulder as Todoroki continued. And you know, there's so many people here, I don't even know how to react. At one point I would have just ignored everyone. When did that change? Izuku gave a small hum. I had siblings once. Todoroki quirked a smile. A sister and 2 brothers, all older. They'd take me to the park and out of the house when things would get too hectic. What were their names? Izuku slowly signed. Todoroki full-on grinned. Tuya, Fuyumi and Natsu. They were the best. Izuku studied Todoroki. Something had happened. Where were Todoroki's siblings now? Same as Arie? Izuku flinched at the thought. Anyways, let's go get some food, yeah? Todoroki and Izuku lay on the couch, Izuku fast asleep with his arms around Todoroki, who lay there awkwardly. His arms were lifted, trying not to disturb the sleeping boy. Shinso snickered in the corner with Kaminari, from where they were reading a book on sign language. You just wait till I slip out? Todoroki hissed. Shinso, Kaminari, and Mina, who had joined, watched as Todoroki slowly but surely slid out from underneath Izuku, getting caught in various awkward positions until he finally collapsed to the floor. The group burst into muffled giggles. Traitors. Arie ended up at a park for the night, curled in a small green tunnel. Green like Izuku's hair, just uglier. And colder. She waited out the night in there, drifting in and out of sleep and jolting awake at the slightest sounds. The wind kept her cold, but once she fell asleep it was easy enough to ignore it, until she was jolted awake by some strange noise all over again. Tears pricked at her eyes. All she wanted was Izuku. Aizawa was in charge of sending the kids to bed that night, as school was the next day. He made sure everyone had eaten, and the bathrooms were shared as they got ready. Izuku was locked in his room for the night, as was Todoroki and Shinso. Sorry. Protocol, Aizawa had muttered. But the lights were out now, and Todoroki was bored. There were enough pins in the room it was easy for him to pick the door, and he was careful not to make any noises creeping up the stairs. Todoroki ended up at a room he was hoping was Izuku's, and started picking at the lock. Stepping inside he knocked once. Izuku? Todoroki? What are you doing here? Todoroki blinked as the lights blinded him, and Momo sat in bed, looking at him confusedly. What's wrong? My apologies, wrong room. Todoroki hastily turned to leave, only to hear footsteps coming down the hall. He quickly shut the door, and ducked next to the desk instead. Aizawa carefully opened the door just as Todoroki ducked out of sight. Lights are Momo, sleep well? Yes sir. Aizawa did a quick glance around the room before leaving. Sorry, Todoroki apologized again, coming out of the corner. I didn't mean to interrupt your sleep. No, it's all good. How did you get out of your room? Todoroki shrugged nonchalantly. It wasn't that difficult. If they really wanted me to stay, they should have at the least added more locks. I see, Momo hummed. Well, I'll let you get to Izuku. Tell him I said hi, and be careful sneaking to his room. Aizawa is way better at catching people than you'd think. I think I can handle one man, Todoroki snorted back. He'd been sneaking around his father for years. How hard could a single mental rehabilitation worker be? The door opened silently as Todoroki crept out carefully, making sure to remain totally quiet as he headed towards Izuku's room. He was nearing the end of the hallway when a tall figure appeared literally out of nowhere. And where do you think you're going? Aizawa stood with his arms crossed, his voice sounding like that of a disappointed dad. Todoroki was only too familiar with that. I'm going to visit Izuku, he announced after some consideration. There was no harm in informing the man of his destination, Todoroki decided. After all, what was the worst he could do? No, you're not. You're going to go back to your room, Aizawa corrected, stepping forward threateningly. Not in the I'm about to hit you way, but the you're going to say way. Todoroki narrowed his eyes, watching the man cautiously as he made his way to him. What exactly are you going to do about it? Todoroki hissed, daring the man to raise a hand. Hit me? Push me? Hurt me? Well, guess what? Been there, done that, he spat. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. Now we're getting somewhere. And no, I'm not going to hurt you, just have you return to your room. Faster than Todoroki expected, Aizawa darted behind him, grabbing his arms and forcing them back, lifting him slightly so he couldn't resist as Aizawa started dragging him back to his room. Todoroki tried to fight and twist out of his grip, but it was to no avail. Let go. Todoroki seethed, trying to kick his feet back at Aizawa. You bastard. Aizawa ignored his protests. I had to deal with Bakugo. This is nothing, he muttered, easily avoiding Todoroki's attack attempts. Todoroki ended up being shoved back into his room, the lock being switched back into place with an audible click. Todoroki rolled his eyes. How annoying. He got the pin back out from where he'd stored it on the desk and unlocked the door once again, but this time he opened it on awaiting Aizawa, sitting in a chair right outside his door and reading a book. Don't even think about it. Aizawa didn't even look up. Todoroki sighed in defeat. This was turning out to be way more trouble than it was worth. Wordlessly, he slammed the door shut and crawled into bed. Might as well get some good rest while he could. He'd try again after a quick nap. Arie jerked awake as squeals filled the playground. Light was shining through the tunnel, and she peeked her head out to see a group of 3 little boys running in. That was all it took for her to slide out, quickly going to the opposite direction of the kids. Surely their parents wouldn't be too far behind, and adults led to questions. Questions led to trouble. Arie was sore from sleeping on the solid flooring, and her neck was stiff from being in an awkward twisted position all night to fit in the tunnel. It still felt like a cool early morning and not many people were in sight. She hummed to herself as she walked along the sidewalk, looking for a big building or any signs. A school would be a perfect hiding place, though a change of clothes and some food would be nice too. Her stomach grumbled at the thought. Izuku always made sure Arie had enough to eat, sometimes at the expense of his own portions. She was used to spread out meals, but also to being full during that time. When Izuku took food, he took a lot. Izuku sat on his bed, curled up, drifting in and out of sleep all night. When morning finally hit and the first rays of light started shining through the boarded-off balcony, he could hear Mick's yells almost immediately. Time to wake up. Something very noisy was clanging as he made his way up and down the dorms. It hurt Izuku's ears with its miserable clashing noise. Rise and shine. Shut it. Katsuki yelled back, while from across the dorm someone let out an ungodly screech. Not even a yell, just a long, held-out, "Arie." It didn't bother Izuku, who stayed in his feeble curled-up position. However, Katsuki was a different story. "Denki Kaminari, if you don't shut the fuck up right now, I'll give you a reason to scream like that dash." "That's enough," Aizawa silenced with a loud roar. Both their voices reluctantly fell down, though a loud crack could be heard when Katsuki punched the wall angrily. Slowly, people started filing out of their rooms and into the bathrooms to get ready. They all had crisp uniforms on, and Izuku noticed a pair next to his door. He hadn't noticed anyone slipping in last night to place them there. Not that he cared. He wondered for a minute if there would be string in the pants he could use. Izuku forced himself up to check it, but was only met with disappointment, because when could life ever go his way? Instead of taking the effort to go back to his bed, he simply dropped to the floor, curling back up once again, stuck with his thoughts. Why did she have to die? First, why couldn't it have been him? He'd give up anything for it to have been him. Todoroki woke up to the yelling and clanging, even more exhausted than when he'd went to bed. True to his words, he'd tried all night to make it to Izuku's room, sure the boy wasn't sleeping. Aizawa foiled every single attempt that was made, even an all-out fighting match. Todoroki had to admit, the man was good. This time when he left his room refreshed in a new suit and feeling cleansed for the first time in a while, Aizawa, thankfully, wasn't at the door. Todoroki met up with Shinso in the hallway, both of them unsure of where to go to get their toiletries for the bathroom. "How'd you sleep?" Todoroki muttered, black rings under his eyes. Nothing compared to Shinso's dark circles. "I didn't. You?" "Here and there," Todoroki admitted. "I tried to see Izuku, and we will not be having a repeat of last night," Aizawa sighed, making them both jump. For people who have had to rely on their survival instincts to survive all their lives, this man knew how to surpass all of them. Todoroki tilted his head at him and blinked. "Of course. Next time I'll actually make it to my destination." Aizawa rubbed his eyes. "Fucking problem children." He turned towards Ida, who was just leaving his room. "Show them the way to the bathrooms, would you? I need to go get Midoriya." Ida saluted Aizawa, then sheepishly put his hand down. "Right, sorry. Please, follow me," he muttered to Shinso and Todoroki, all confidence gone. The two boys shared a look, but followed the third down the corridor. This would be a long day. After retrieving Izuku and practically carrying him to the kitchen, everyone was ready to go. Since they were a special class, they were allowed to go off schedule whenever necessary, so it was no issue for Izuku to be slowly hand-fed by Todoroki, Katsuki standing over them with his arms crossed and eyes narrowed, refusing to look away for even a second. Finally, they filed into the bus. Izuku sat next to Todoroki, Shinso in the seat next to them, with Kaminari in the window seat. Everyone was pretty spread out, and light-hearted chatter filled the bus, which turned into a tense silence as the bus passed the gate and pulled into the school. "All right, everyone out," Aizawa ordered, waiting in front of the bus. Mike stood beside him, silently counting off the kids in his head as they trudged out. "You can go on in. Class starts in 10 minutes, so say hi to friends and go straight to the homeroom." Katsuki snorted at the friends, and joined Kirishima, Kaminari, Jairu, Mina, and Siro as they headed inside. Everyone started to do that, breaking into their own little groups until only Shinso, Todoroki, and Izuku were left with Mike. "You little listeners going to be okay?" Mike asked. "I have to get to class too." Todoroki waved at him lazily. "We'll be fine." Mike gave them a hesitant nod before heading off in the same direction as everyone else, leaving the three boys alone. Todoroki nodded at Shinso, and they each went to one of Izuku's sides, gently nudging him towards the school. Izuku kept his gaze on the ground. He didn't want to look up and see everything. The noise itself was already overwhelming him. He hated it. He hated everything. He hated life. Todoroki and Shinso made some small talk, but Izuku didn't mind it any attention. He didn't care what they were talking about. It wasn't Arie, so it didn't concern him. The first bell rang, making the halls started to clear. Shinso gave a tired groan. "At the speed we're gonna be late. And I'm not in the mood to receive shit for it." Todoroki nodded. "I have an idea. Help me get him on my back." Shinso and Todoroki struggled for a minute to get a limp Izuku onto his back, but once he was on, Todoroki piggybacked him the rest of the way. Until they realized they had no clue where they were going, at least. "If we're lost, I blame you." Shinso sighed. "You're the one who said to take that right," Todoroki argued. "That didn't mean you had to listen." "Then you shouldn't have said it if you didn't want me to do it." Izuku rested his head on Todoroki's shoulder as the two continued to bicker. Finally he tapped Todoroki's shoulder, getting his attention, and pointed at a hall. "Then a left, one more right, and it's the first door," he signed. "Thanks," Todoroki said, cutting Shinso off from his next words by proceeding in the said direction. Shinso grumbled something inaudibly, but followed nonetheless. They didn't bother knock on the classroom door before going in, making Aizawa glare at them. "You're late." Shinso matched his glare. "We're here now, aren't we?" He took a seat in one of the few open ones without waiting for a response, Todoroki putting Izuku in a set's behind Katsuki, and going to his own seat in a far corner. Aizawa rubbed his eyes, already done with the day. "I'll let it go this time." The school day was boring and long, and work continued to stack in front of Izuku while he sat there mindlessly, thoughts only on his dead little sister. Mike tried to coax him into doing even some independent work, but the boy didn't so much as twitch. Their next class was gym, so everyone filed down to the changing room to get ready. This time, Uraraka showed them the way instead of letting them get lost again. Todoroki managed to get Izuku inside, but he didn't make a move to get changed. Izuku, you can finally get some feelings out, Shinso tried to negotiate. You just need to switch outfits? You'll get all sweaty if you don't change, Todoroki reasoned. What do you need to do it? Tears pricked at Izuku's eyes. What I need? His raspy, quiet voice surprised everyone, and the boys' room instantly fell silent. What I need, he repeated, stronger this time, and emotion filled his voice. Arie. And she's gone. There's no point of me being here, there's no feelings to finally get out. Everything's done without her. Don't you get that? Why can't you fucking understand? Tears streamed down Izuku's face freely now. He was done holding them back as sobs overtook him. His chest was getting tight as he sucked in air that was slowly leaving his lungs and his vision blurred. Everything was dizzy. Izuku tried to take a step forward, only to collapse to the ground. Oh shit! Someone yelled. It felt like a distant whisper a million miles away to Izuku. He's having a panic attack. Someone get Mr. Aizawa. A ringing overtook his hearing, blocking everything else out. Memories of Arie swirled his mind, making his panic even worse as the video replayed. Replayed over and over and over. Izuku was losing his mind. Finally, at the first spots of black in his vision, Izuku immediately gave in, desperate to make it stop. Make his mind stop. Make these horrible thoughts stop. Falling into an unconscious state felt like bliss to him, and for just a second, the corners of his lips quirked upwards, and then the world was no more. Izuku woke up in a white bed with an old, short lady in front of him, typing away at a computer while simultaneously arguing with Aizawa, seemingly about something like pushing him too hard. Izuku just curled up back into his little ball, shutting out the outside world. He was so tired. Why couldn't they see that? You're awake, the woman announced, stopping Aizawa mid-sentence. You can call me Recovery Girl. How are you feeling? Izuku ignored her, his eyes glazing over. Arie would have loved this feisty yet sweet old woman. Izuku's heart ached at the thought. It ached so badly he almost groaned from the pain. He doesn't talk, Aizawa spoke up when Izuku didn't. I see, Recovery Girl hummed. Does he sign? They both looked at Izuku, who refused to move. Guess not. Thanks for your help, but we should get going now. Aizawa gently helped get Izuku standing, leading him towards the door. Recovery Girl mumbled something cross, right before Aizawa let the door slam behind him in exasperation. Izuku let Aizawa take the lead as they walked in silence, not paying attention to the destination or stares he was receiving from nearby students. We're just waiting for Mike to bring the bus around, so you can hang out for a bit while he does that if you want. Just be back here in about 10 minutes, okay? Izuku didn't respond, per normal, but Aizawa took it as a sign he understood and went to go find some other staff. Izuku didn't move until he felt a figure shove him backwards without warning. Izuku didn't even flinch as he stumbled a step, catching himself before he tripped any further. Well, if it isn't the freak. Not so powerful without your friends, are we? Momo spat, raising his fist to level a punch at Izuku's face. Izuku didn't even whimper as Momo slammed his foot into Izuku's leg, not letting himself crumple either though. Pain shot through him that he easily ignored. He could feel the old wounds opening up, but he didn't care. Let them. Momo went to throw another punch when a sharp voice stopped him. What the fuck do you think you're doing? Katsuki stomped over to the boy, making him quickly back up a few steps. Izuku let himself stand there limply as Katsuki cussed Momo out and sent him running, before turning to check on Izuku. Did he hurt you? He demanded. Izuku didn't respond. Deku, did he hurt you? Katsuki asked, a bit more forcefully this time. Izuku realized he wouldn't give up without a response and gave him the tiniest head shake. Katsuki saw it though and scoffed. Good. Let's get you to the bus. There's no way you can possibly cause any more trouble. Izuku let Katsuki lead him to the bus, trying not to stumble as he pressed a hand against his side carefully and peeled it back to stare at his now blood-soaked hand. A ghost of a smile almost took over Izuku's face. They didn't have to wait long before the bus got filled, and Mike and Aizawa trudged on, followed by a new woman in purple. She cooed loudly at the sight of Todoroki, Shinso and Izuku. Who are these new cuties? Shinso blinked, unsure whether or not she meant him. Cutie was definitely a new one for him. He had only heard, bastard, worthless, and so on. He have to ask Todoroki what it meant later. Todoroki, on the other hand, was openly sneering at the woman. Fuck off. I thought this was a place of recovery. I guess I was wrong, you're the same as everyone else. The rest of the bus ride home was silent after Todoroki's explosion. Todoroki didn't stop glaring once, even as the woman apologized and introduced herself as Midnight, a part-time staff. Todoroki only looked away when they arrived so he could help Izuku off the bus. By then, Izuku had all the color drained from his face, and he swayed dangerously, even with Shinso and Todoroki on either side. His ears rang and his forehead was sticky with sweat. Both boys noticed immediately. Are you okay? Shinso whispered, when the staff had gone inside. To their surprise, Izuku opened his mouth as if to respond, right before grabbing his side in a moment of extreme pain, taking his hand away and accidentally showing Shinso and Todoroki it was blood-soaked, before promptly collapsing into a heap on the ground. Izuku! Todoroki had an irritating day. First, there was school without Izuku after he had that panic attack, and then Midnight with her fucking words. Now, because this was the day he was having apparently, Izuku had to collapse again. Shinso ran inside to grab a staff, while Todoroki cradled Izuku to his chest protectively. Aizawa and Midnight came running back, so Todoroki assumed Mike stayed behind to keep an eye on the others or maybe to call someone. What happened? Aizawa demanded, but Midnight was the one to reach down to Izuku, and instantly Todoroki smacked her hand away with a glare. Back up, he hissed, holding Izuku even tighter. Todoroki, we need to access Midoriya, Aizawa tried to reason. We need you to let him go. Todoroki shook his head. No. Todoroki dash, Aizawa warned, stepping forward. Go away. I'll handle it. Two arms gently wrapped around Todoroki, quickly prying him off of Izuku as he froze in shock, fear filling his face. When he realized what Mike had done, he started to fight, squirming and kicking, desperate to get back to the unconscious boy. Todoroki, take a breathe, Mike ordered, gently forcing him away from the scene, Shinso following him reluctantly from Aizawa's orders. No. You need to let me go back. Todoroki tried, trying to yank himself free. Mike got him inside and wrestled him into the gym, locking the door with the three of them inside. Shinso looked at him, and Mike finally released Todoroki, allowing him to glare at the staff viciously. What are we doing here? Shinso muttered, flinching back as soon as the question left his lips. You're getting some of your feelings out, Mike explained. I'm here to supervise, 'cause I don't think you two should be left alone right now. That's stupid. I'm not going to exercise while Midoriya is dash. Midoriya is being taken care of. You two need to focus on yourselves too, Mike interrupted. Shinso could see in his eyes he wasn't going to give this up. He sighed in defeat, and Todoroki turned his glare on him as if knowing what he was thinking. Fine. We'll go along with your fucking plan. But afterwards we get to see Izuku. Deal? Mike nodded and Todoroki rolled his eyes. Deal. Arie was tired. She had been wandering for what felt like an entirety no. She didn't know how long it's actually been. Her whole body ached as she forced herself to go on. Her feet were bruised and bloodied from all the walking, since she was barefoot and it made her frown deepen. Izuku would be sad she was hurting, but she couldn't stop. She had to keep moving. Because somebody was following her. She had noticed it the past hour, and almost cried from not paying more attention, silently beating herself up. She was determined not to get caught by anyone. Arie hadn't seen the person, but could hear their footsteps constantly behind her, and whenever she'd turn around at least two figures would dart somewhere dark where she couldn't make out any features. She had to get rid of them. Izuku woke up for the second time that day in a white bed. This time, the room he was in was bigger, and Recovery Girl was back, waiting for him in the chair. Well, you're just a bucket of trouble, aren't you? Izuku let his eyes dull as he crept into his thoughts, ignoring everything else. He wanted to be in the one place he could still see Arie, no matter how horrible that place was. His head. He wasn't sure how long the lecture went on before he stumbled out of the room. He wasn't quite aware of where he was headed, nor did Izuku care. He let his legs lead the way. No one was around, but Izuku didn't notice. He didn't wonder where they were, though he felt himself aching for the comfort of the red and white-haired boy. He quickly shook the feeling off. The only person he should be aching for is Arie. Somehow Izuku found himself outside. Not outside the building, outside a filthy beach. It had trash covering every inch as far as the eye could see, and of every kind. There were broken couches, cracked TVs, lamps, glass, even a fridge. Before Izuku knew what he was doing, he had made a small pile of broken glass, shoving it into 2 doubled-up hole-filled bags. It made him freeze. Why was he doing this? The beach was obviously hopeless. Except Arie flashed into his head, her big eyes staring up at him pleadingly. "Come on, Izu." Her small voice chanted. "I've always wanted to see the ocean. And this place needs our help." Izuku let his head drop, bangs covering his dark and teary eyes. Without warning, he swung around and punched the broken fridge, before doing it again and again and again. He didn't stop until the rusted fridge had cracks all along it and his knuckles were dripping blood down his hand slowly. Izuku dropped to the ground and sobbed. He wailed, heart aching, notes heart-shattering. His choked cries eventually slowed down to empty hiccups. When that happened, he shakily forced himself up and started lugging the broken glass to the nearest dumpster, a little walk away. Then he came back, and with all his strength he started shoving the broken fridge. It was hard work and Izuku was drenched in sweat by the time he was done, but finally he made it successfully over to the dumpster. The sky was darkening now. Izuku sighed as he brushed himself off. He needed to get back before Aizawa went looking for him. If he found this place, no doubt Izuku would be banned from it and Aizawa would know where to look when he came back again. The only problem, Izuku didn't know which way to go. He started to walk, not caring where he ended up as long as it was away from the beach. He couldn't lead the others back to it, he just couldn't. His muscles groaned in protest as he forced himself forward, thoughts on Arie. He felt refreshed. A long shot from Yokai, and he was still tired with big rings around his eyes, but he had a new goal. A goal to keep him going for now, anyways. Izuku wasn't sure how long he had walked before someone started following him. Maybe turning down that dark alley hadn't been the smartest idea when he was this tired, but he did it anyways. Izuku didn't turn around until he had trapped himself into a corner, finally scanning for his stalker. "You can come out now," he called, slumped in exhaustion. Slowly, a tall, big man stepped out, with mud-brown hair and dull gray eyes. The way he was built and hunched over almost made him look like a slime creature in the dark. "Guess the kid noticed me," he sneered, and Izuku could smell the alcohol from where he was standing a few feet away. "Boss's orders, he wants you back ASAP." Izuku shivered. He had to finish the beach. "How'd you know where I was?" "That's not your concern. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Choose now." Izuku's eyes narrowed, and he sucked in a breath, stretching his tired muscles. "I choose my way." Izuku flung himself at the villain before he could react, slamming him against the wall multiple times before sending a punch right at his face. The villain grunted in pain before shoving Izuku off, but didn't dodge his kick as it slammed into the villain's knees, making him crumple to the ground. The villain used his nails to scrape against Izuku's face before using all his strength to throw him into the wall. Izuku collapsed with a groan at the impact. His vision was darting in and out. Tears were pricking at Izuku's eyes once again that he forced down. He had finally found one last reason to live, and now they were going to take that away from him too. He tried to stand to fight, but his legs couldn't do it, and once again he collapsed to the ground. The darkness was pulling him in all too quickly. Izuku couldn't resist it any longer. Right before his eyes shut, a loud noise sounded, before he felt a shadow stand over him. "I am here." Izuku woke up at the slight touch to his neck, gasping for breath and shoving away the intruder. He was still on the ground with the police officer from the raid standing over him. "All might." And next to him stood a furious Aizawa. "What were you thinking?" The calm tone Aizawa used actually made Izuku shrink back a little. He slumped back down and stared at the ground, his thoughts desperately calculating the distance from the beach. It had to be enough. You will never pull a stunt like that again. Do you understand how bad that could have been? What were you even doing out here? For fuck's sake, Izuku tuned Aizawa out easily, instead turning to stare at the sky. Dark colors striped the sky as the sun set for the day. Dawn was Izuku's favorite time of day. When the day was finally over. Aizawa, I think he gets it, All Might interrupted, though they both could tell he wasn't paying any attention. At this point it was lecturing All Might more than Izuku. All Might leaned down to face Izuku. I'm not sure if you remember me, but I'm All Might. I saved you from the fight a while back. Izuku didn't even try to hide his disgust at the words. All Might saved him? He would have laughed if it wasn't for the fact it made him so angry. Izuku wasn't the one who needed to be saved. Where was he before then? When they both needed him. And I'm your new hire at you. All Might finished with a wide smile. Izuku glared at the man with everything he could muster in his weak state. He felt sick and resisted the urge to gag. Now he had to live with the man who killed his sister. Izuku was sure it was him who had interrupted the fight. Taken that picture. His eyes started to burn, but Izuku ignored it. He would never give this man that satisfaction of seeing him cry. Arie walked as quickly as possible without trying to make it clear she was doing her best to put more and more distance between her and her follower. She recalled what Izuku had taught her about being followed. Force them to come out, trap them by making them think they've trapped you, fight them with all you've got and prove they've underestimated you. Now he also said that was in case of emergencies and for when she was older, but this seemed like an appropriate time. She readjusted the bandages on her right arm as she walked. It had become loose. She kept those bandages around her limbs for Aizu, so whenever he was hurt she'd have them on hand, no matter where their locations changed to. She had a knife hidden under the one on her leg. Slipping behind a house, she started her way towards an alley, where a wall trapped her between the houses. Perfect. Izuku would have been proud. Sure enough, 3 figures stepped out of the dark, allowing Arie to openly glare at them. What do you want? She tried her best to sound intimidating, but really her voice was squeaky and raspy from the lack of use. It made her cheeks burn a cherry pink. You can relax, Mirio tried, we're here to help. Then why do you have backup? She tried to hiss. Again, it came out high-pitched and adorable, making the kids' hearts melt at the pitiful noise. These are my friends, Nijire and Tamaki. We don't mean you any harm, we just want to dash. Arie took the chance to dart past them. Izuku always said to move while they were talking. She could hear their footsteps instantly after her and pushed herself to run faster. Their voices called after her from behind. Her feet burned against the ground and she glanced back to see she was leaving a bloody footprint trail behind her. Arie winced at the sight and turned away, focusing on how to lose them. She just had to. Tears pricked at her eyes. She had made it so far, Arie was sure she was close to Izuku. She couldn't be caught now. Izuku was back at UA and sitting on the couch. Except he wasn't. He was at the bar with Shigaraki, Kurogiri, and Inko. They were downstairs in a wide room, standing across from a huge man. He was scarred and ripped, and impossibly big for a normal human. No. Inko shoved Izuku forward, but he caught himself before tripping, standing shakily with his arms out in front of him, ready to fight. Izuku was covered in scratches and gashes from the last round, but he was ready to go again, despite his absolute exhaustion. He had to be. Arie was on the line. The girl in question sat opposite to them all, a chain around her leg forcing her trapped against the wall. The chain dug in tightly, but Arie didn't dare make a sound. Not after what Izuku was putting up with for her. She could only watch the fighting with big eyes, and hope with everything she's got her brother would be all right. Again, Shigaraki's voice was scratchy, and as soon as the order left his lips Izuku and Momo were jumping at each other all over again. Momo easily pushed Izuku down, and Izuku scratched and bit and swung and kicked as hard as he could to get out, finally leaping up after catching Momo in the eye with a small dagger. As Momo roared, Arie flinched, but Izuku forced himself not to. He had to be strong for her. His mom's gaze pierced Izuku savagely. He knew he'd be getting beaten when they got home, though for what, he wasn't sure yet. Izuku wiped off the blood that was dripping down his face with a sneer. Again. Izuku! A voice snapped, and instantly Izuku was back in the living room, Todoroki standing in front of him worriedly. Izuku blinked at Todoroki and very slowly put a hand out, tapping Todoroki's shoulder. He needed to be sure this was real. What's wrong? Todoroki was beyond worried. Izuku had been gasping for air when he'd walked in, eyes completely unfocused and glazed over, even more so than usual. Shigaraki's order was stuck in Izuku's head. Fin. Again. It came out a mere whisper, and Todoroki frowned. Again what? What's going on, Izuku? Izuku shook his head. He couldn't handle this right now. He looked at his knuckles that had been bandaged up. Punching Nomu was like punching a robot. Todoroki sighed in frustration. He could tell the boy was shutting down again. But damn it, he was worried. The best Todoroki could offer was a small, timid smile, and very gently and lightly placing an arm around Izuku. At first he tensed up, but when he realized Todoroki wasn't going to hurt him, Izuku sunk into Todoroki's warm hug, letting his eyes flutter shut against him to really feel the embrace. Izuku sighed at the feeling. This must have been how Arie felt when they cuddled, and Izuku certainly wasn't complaining. Todoroki and Izuku sat there for hours as people came and went around them. Izuku ignored all might, but Todoroki could tell something was wrong when the man came in to introduce himself to Todoroki. Todoroki sent him away with a glare for upsetting Izuku. The two ended up not falling asleep but spending the night on the couch in the embrace, both content and at peace. For the first time, Izuku let himself focus on something other than Arie's death. The next morning they were back at school as if nothing had happened. Aizawa was determined to keep a close eye on his problem child, refusing to let him out of his sight for the first half of the day. Izuku didn't bother try to resist, nor did he care what the older man did, as long as he'd still be able to sneak away to the beach. That beach had been on Izuku's mind all day, giving him energy after the previous night of no sleep, even if it was with Todoroki. The exhaustion wasn't as extreme. The world felt a little lighter. Cope ahead for gym, Shinso warned, waving his hand in the air lazily. Don't want you passing out again. Izuku gave a meaningless shrug but did note that in his head. No passing out, or he'd risk not being able to get to the beach. Todoroki took a bite of his soba. I'm glad you're eating, Izuku. He didn't expect a response, nor did he get one. The classes were currently at lunch, room filled with a loud chatter. Izuku ignored it, Todoroki disliked it, and Shinso loathed it. It was too chaotic. Too hard to focus on one thing, or even multiple things because too much was going on. He couldn't prepare properly to fight back with everything so close together. Despite Shinso's worries, the bell rang with no issues, signaling their next class. Everyone had gathered outside, Izuku, per usual, between Todoroki and Shinso, although Kaminari was quite noticeably inching nearer and nearer to Shinso. The sun shone brightly, glinting on the obstacle course in front of them. There was a long field with cones on either sides, an area with a large hoop and baseballs opposing each other, a grip strength machine, repeating side steps, and a seated toe touches and sit-ups area. Aizawa explained each task as he went around to demonstrate each one. Izuku's eyes glossed over as he went limp, and in an instant he was back at the bar. Looking around cautiously, he noted he was back outside, Arie in chains beside him. Izuku nearly collapsed in relief, and kneeled down to squeeze the little girl in a tight hug that she tearily returned just as hard, desperate for him to stay safe. As long as Arie was okay, he could do anything. Izuku and Arie were situated behind a brutal course of the League's own design, practically made to kill. Not that they'd let him die, of course. Izuku had been through it enough times to know the small tricks to make it less painful. The rolling high off the ground skinny tube, the freezing water, the mini minefield, Nomu, who was always waiting to beat him up, and the racetrack. It took a minute for Izuku to realize he was drenched and freezing to the bone. Small scratches covered his arms and legs, and he had basically no breath. Had he already gone through it a few times? Why couldn't he remember doing so? Shigaraki's cursed word filled the air from where he was standing with Kurogiri and a sitting crisscross Toga, who was munching on popcorn as she watched intensely. Again, Izuku sucked in breaths desperately as he took off running, climbing the tall, old rickety ladder before leaping gracefully onto the spinning tube and quickly racing across it before it could knock him off balance. The punishment for that would have been much worse than the course could ever be. He let a small whimper slip as he jumped into the ice water, teeth chattering from the cold. Izuku had to fight to keep from going in shock. He started to swim with big and heavy strokes until he reached the end and gratefully clambered out, his whole body shaking harshly. Next was the mini minefield. Izuku was back on the ground level for this, darting in between bits of grass from the dirt to avoid stepping on a small mine. Right as he was reaching the end, he tipped out of balance and his foot fell an inch into the dirt. Izuku dove for cover right away as the ground behind him exploded. Kurogiri hummed in disappointment, and Shigaraki rolled his eyes. Izuku didn't wait around before jumping up and running towards the race track. He had 2 minutes to run a mile. Racing around the track after the cold water was good to warm back up, but a new scratch was oozing blood on the back of his neck. Izuku was starting to get dizzy as black dots threatened to take over his vision. Drenched in sweat, Izuku paused just long enough for Shigaraki to give the tiniest of nods that he did all right in timing so he could take off towards Momo. Everything in him was screaming and shouting at him to run away, aching in protest, but he could feel Arie's big eyes on his back that most likely were red from silently crying as she tried to muffle her sobs. So Izuku kept going. Because he had to. Momo had the obvious advantage of not being exhausted, even though he still had his own share of scratches from their previous fights. Izuku jumped onto Momo, catching him off guard, and slammed his head into the side of the bar. Momo roared in pain and Toga clapped and loudly cheered from the side. It didn't take much struggle for Momo to throw Izuku off, slamming him into the ground much harder than Izuku had managed to slam him. The breath left his body, and his vision blurred even more. Momo sent a hard kick at Izuku before he could get up, flinging him across the ground even further. This time, Izuku felt a rib crack. Everything was in circles around him. The room wouldn't stop moving. Izuku couldn't get up. Get up. Shigaraki's scratchy voice stopped Momo in his tracks as he stalked towards Izuku again. Now, Izuku started to try, coughing up blood as he forced himself to sit up. His stomach burned in pain, nearly making Izuku pass out, and his head pounded. He sucked in deep breaths as he unstably and weakly stood up, swaying on his feet. Immediately his legs buckled and Izuku collapsed back to the ground, coughing up even more blood. He couldn't even get enough strength to get out any pleads for mercy. It was Shigaraki's turn to stalk towards Izuku. This time he was the one to slam his foot into Izuku's stomach. Worthless! He spat. He stepped on Izuku's face, pushing it into the ground as he leaned above him. Izuku gave a muffled cry of pain. Izuku! Shigaraki pressed harder, and blood started pouring down Izuku's face. The tears started before he could stop them. He couldn't even see Arie. Izuku desperately hoped she wasn't watching this. Maybe Toga had taken pity and taken her inside, though he sincerely doubted it. But he had to hope. Izuku! Izuku couldn't focus on anything. The black dots started seeping down until it was taking up all his vision. Or were his eyes just shutting? He couldn't tell and could barely make out Shigaraki. Izuku! In a sharp breath, Izuku snapped back to reality. He blinked as he took in the new sunlight with Todoroki waving a hand cautiously in his face, and looked around in confusion. Where's Arie signed? Todoroki hid his horror well, biting back a wince. He watched as the realization sank into Izuku, almost in slow motion. His legs buckled just for Todoroki to catch him at the last second. Todoroki didn't know what to say, so he just stood there, holding Izuku up while his legs wouldn't work as silent tears streaked down his cheeks. What's going on over here? All Might asked, bright smile on display. Without hesitation, Izuku flipped him the middle finger and shakily turned away, Todoroki refusing to let go. They were at the school's own race track at the moment, at the finish line. Izuku didn't remember running the track. Is something wrong? Do we need to step away, young Midoriya? Fuck off, Todoroki stated calmly but warningly. Leave us alone. I won't tell you again. All Might hesitated, but reluctantly backed off. He joined Aizawa on the sidelines, who was observing the whole scene. "Shouldn't we step in?" All Might muttered questioningly. "Leave it," Aizawa ordered. "Part of this job is knowing when they'll accept help and when it isn't necessary yet." Izuku was back at the beach, scooping up armfuls of broken items that varied from clocks, to pipes, to broken shards of glass that poked into his arm uncomfortably. He had snuck away while Aizawa and Mike were preparing dinner. All Might, thankfully too absorbed with his story, he was telling Momo and Uraraka to realize Izuku had left. He couldn't stay long because dinner would only take an hour, but he spent his time pushing and pulling and carrying all sorts of trash in that time, lugging old sofas and chairs, broken bed frames, some cracked desks, everything he could possibly fit in that time to the dumpster across the street. He hoped the owner wouldn't be too mad he was using it, if that's how they worked. Izuku took a minute to survey the mess remaining on the beach. Even though it had only been a few days, he'd already made a huge dent in the mess. Not quite even a tenth of it, but he was getting close. He was on his way back to UA when a small item caught his attention. Izuku picked it up, brushing off the dirt and dust as he walked. It was a small stuffed bunny rabbit, with long ears that reached its little fluffy tail. It was absolutely filthy and covered in soot. Arie would have loved it. Izuku suppressed a sob, throwing the little bunny as far as he could onto the beach. It landed a good distance away, but tears still pricked Izuku's eyes, and he ended up having to run back to the dumpster and start heaving into it. He threw up everything he had eaten that day as a tear slipped out. Once there was nothing left to throw up, he started dry heaving. Izuku's throat was raw and hurting, but he forced himself to keep walking anyways. It wasn't bad pain, nothing compared to what Izuku was used to. He was met outside UA by a waiting Todoroki with his arms crossed and eyes narrowed. "And just where have you been?" Izuku froze in his tracks, suddenly feeling the need to explain himself. "I was going for a walk," he signed, confusion clear on his face. "And you didn't tell someone? Or bring anyone with you? What if you had run into another villain? Or passed out again? What then?" Izuku looked down shyly and shrugged. Todoroki seethed from across him. Izuku sat uncomfortably next to Shinso, avoiding looking across the table at Todoroki. Todoroki was still glaring at Izuku even after he had spent a good half-hour lecturing Izuku for leaving. Shinso, on the other hand, had no idea what the fuck was going on, but knew it was somehow Izuku's fault and had taken up nudging the freckled boy every few seconds to try and get an explanation. Izuku ignored him. When Aizawa came in with dinner, he could tell something had gone down, also figuring it to be Izuku's doing, but was too tired to try and get it out from them. Dinner. The room was filled with the kids, all in various positions across the room. Kirishima and Mino were crisscrossed on the floor by Bakugu, and that was just for starters. A light chatter was in the room while people ate, and for the first time since Arie had died, Izuku picked up the fork and started to eat by himself. Todoroki and Shinso stared with their jaws wide. Then caught themselves and quickly looked away, both having a slight red tinge on their cheeks in embarrassment. Izuku sat on the couch silently with Todoroki and Shinso while Kaminari, Katsuki, and Wararaka fought over the TV remote. Ida was also there, not helping by doing a chopping arm motion while giving a lecture about taking turns and sharing, which was just drowned out by all the yelling. Izuku had already heard enough lectures for one day, so he easily tuned them out. Until the TV landed on the news station. The infamous League of Villains have collaborated another attack? Izuku's attention was snapped to the TV, and he swiveled his head around so fast he made Shinso jump in surprise. The news reporter continued. "We have reasons to believe that the serial killer, going by Stain, might have been involved." Izuku didn't realize that the room had gone deadly silent. Todoroki and Shinso didn't know what was happening that made the arguing cease so suddenly, but Ida looked as if he had been shot. "Stain." Izuku's voice was barely audible, but the numbness and recognition was clear in his voice. And Ida heard it. In an instant he was on top of Izuku, slamming a fist into his face. "How do you know about that monster?" He seethed venomously, slamming Izuku against the ground. Izuku had gone back into his shell the second Ida had jumped up. What did he care about being beaten? Hopefully this would result in his death if it kept up. Then he'd finally get to see Arie again. That was all he wanted. Ida slammed a foot into Izuku's stomach, and a trickle of blood dripped from Izuku's mouth onto his clothes. Snapping out of their shock, Uraraka and Katsuki yanked Ida off of Izuku, both holding an arm as Ida struggled in their grip. "Mr. Aizawa!" Uraraka yelled, trying and failing to get Ida away from Izuku. "We need help." The man was there before Uraraka could finish her sentence, gently pushing Uraraka and Katsuki back, and putting Ida into a restraining position. "What happened?" His voice was calm, but the aura that was surrounding him made all the kids shiver. Todoroki glared at Ida. He jumped Izuku, he snarled, gently peeling Izuku up off the ground and wrapping his arms around him protectively. Todoroki gently laid the dissociated boy on the couch where Shinso started checking him over for injuries while Todoroki stood blocking Ida's view from Izuku, ready to fight should he jump at Izuku again. Aizawa raised an eyebrow. "Ida? He killed my brother." Ida screamed, still fighting Aizawa's grip. "I'm going to kill anyone that even mutters his name. I will avenge him." Izuku pushed Shinso away and sat up. "Please do," he signed defeatedly. "Is this some sort of sick joke to you? My brother. I'm going to kill you." Ida spat out the last words, twisting as Aizawa held him tighter. "Please do." Izuku finally spat back through gritted teeth. "You think you're special? I've lost people too, you know. You're not the only fucking one. I don't even know Stain, he was just someone who was there to torture me, just like the rest of Dash." Izuku quickly snapped his mouth shut, trembling harshly. His vision started to blur and chest ached as a panic attack started to come on. "Mike!" Aizawa shouted, trying not to scare anyone too badly. "I need your help." Mike was there slower than Aizawa, but he arrived. All the yelling was making it really hard for Izuku to try and shove his panic attack down as he involuntarily sucked in breaths. Mike took a stunned Ida from Aizawa's grip and started leading him away. Aizawa gently helped Izuku up and started heading for the door as well. "Where are you taking him?" Todoroki hissed, going to follow. "Sit down. We're going for a walk." Aizawa shut the door behind them, leading Izuku into the cloud-covered sky. Katsuki laid on his mattress. It was a plain orange with a single giant grenade covering the blanket. His eyes were heavy and Katsuki felt too worn out to bother resist. When he opened his eyes a second later, he was sitting in a living room. Katsuki's house was nice and surprisingly neat. He had small lighters and mini bonfire areas set up along his wall, some even outside his room. "Dinner," Mitsuki called from downstairs. Katsuki rolled his eyes before getting up. "Quit yelling, stupid hag. Who are you calling stupid?" She yelled back, swatting playfully at his head as he walked by her to the table. At the table, Katsuki's dad sat with a newspaper in hand. He just sighed at the two of them as they continued their useless bickering, all too used to it. Dinner was served and Katsuki had never felt more nauseous. Like something bad was going to happen. His stomach was in knots and his eyes felt ready to be filled with tears. It all happened in slow motion. Mitsuki was standing up to put away her dishes when a huge explosion sounded from the direction she had just walked in. Katsuki and Masaru shot up, Masaru racing towards Mitsuki. Katsuki went to scramble after them only for a blazing tipped blue fire to block off the entranceway, burning Katsuki before he could fully jump back. Katsuki started screaming, desperately calling out his parents' names. There was no way he was leaving without them. No matter how Katsuki tried to get to the kitchen, the fire seemed to be one step ahead, blocking off every possible way in. He could hear his parents' screams of agony coming from inside. "No!" Tears streaked down Katsuki's face as he wailed in despair when their voices disappeared. "Please!" Losing all caution, Katsuki forced himself through the fire. It easily caught onto his shirt and he grit his teeth from the pain. The kitchen was filled with smoke, but Katsuki managed to make it to the two lumps on the floor. He started to scream again, calling their names and shaking them, before finally reaching into the fire and turning them over. Time froze. Mitsuki's eyes were wide open and glossy as fire ate away at her hair and clothing, engulfing her in flames before Katsuki. He couldn't even scream as he watched the same thing happen to his dad. He was left slumped in defeat and horror, his mind unable to process what he had just seen. Katsuki couldn't hear some people pounding at the door. He could no longer feel the fire eating away at his clothes, fiercely burning his skin. He didn't even register when a part of the roof fell and landed on top of him, barely noting the pain of a broken leg as he was stuck staring at his burning, dead parents. And then all went black. Katsuki shot upwards, panting and drenched in sweat. Trembling, he forced himself on shaky legs out of bed, almost collapsing at the feeling of the floor before stumbling his way to the one place he felt safe: the gym. Aizawa led Izuku a few blocks away to a small clearing. The sky was easily visible from there, and Izuku could see sun peeking through the clouds. He sent Aizawa a hesitant look before slowly sinking into the grass, laying out starfish style as he breathed in the fresh air. They sat in silence for a while as the clouds slowly floated by and it got darker and darker. Soon enough the clouds had cleared enough that the stars were visible, and once he got a look, Izuku couldn't take his eyes off of them. Aizawa felt surprisingly content watching the boy stare in awe at the stars. He looked at peace. Maybe even a little restful, with his eyes wide and half-open mouth. It was a little silly and almost made Aizawa want to laugh. Almost.